back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed, and we are exploring Plato's Phaedo. Yay! So, why are we exploring Plato's Phaedo? Well, we're on a discovery to find out not just what philosophy is and why we should care about it, but what it means to practice philosophy in our whole lives and how that will affect us not just in this life, but in our transition to the next life. Wow. According to Socrates, apparently philosophy is not just about how to live well while you're here, but it's how to die well. In fact, we have encountered a quote section in the Phaedo where Socrates outlines that philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying. So, in the Phaedo, Socrates' last day, he says, if we're true philosophers who have practiced philosophy right, done our work well, the work of being a human being, then we should follow him as quickly as we can to the place where he is going. What the heck is that place? Why do philosophers desire it? Why do we practice getting there? Why do we try and get there as much as we can before they bury us, before our final death? What significance will that make for our lives here and in that place? And Socrates adds a little bit in the end. Oh, by the way, make some stories about it, mythologize that. So we've been exploring not just the understanding of Socrates' doctrine of philosophy, which he also calls his defense of philosophy, because a lot of people at his time didn't like philosophy that much. In fact, they might go out of their way to murder a dude if he was a philosopher, which is, of course, Socrates' fate, sadly. So it's a defense for why philosophy is important as a way of living, but also why it's important as our human quest here, because we're going to somewhere. So, isn't it important to know what that place is? And wouldn't it make sense that part of our life's work is to understand and prepare for that kind of a journey? And if he's saying to his friends, hey, I don't mean kill yourself, I mean something else. What is that something else? Something to do with collecting yourself together from your physical senses, turning yourself from somebody who is a lover of the body, philosomatos, and the two kinds of things that entails, being a lover of riches or a lover of honors, which we see most people every day are motivated by kind of one of those kinds of things, into a lover of learning, and upgrade from a lover of learning to a lover of philosophy. And then there's a further upgrade Socrates is talking about, which we are trying our best to participate in or share in ourselves, that he calls a rite of initiation into being a true inspired mystic. Being an inspired mystic is the true practice of philosophy. And there's a lovely quote that we have, staff bearers are many, but few are the inspired mystics. And those I call the ones who have practiced philosophy correctly. Wow, isn't that interesting? What a wonderful way of talking about philosophy. And keep in mind, this is not opinion. This is not Socrates' opinion. It might start with belief and trust in your logos, but it's something we have to repeat and go back to and verify in our own development of our understanding. And that's what we've been learning. How do we do that? How do we develop our own understanding? Well, Socrates says that's a kind of purification. That development of your understanding is a kind of purification. It's called dianoia. It's the use of the logos with the dialectic. Those two things joined together. And why is that important? Well, actually, I think we have some great quotes from what we've been reading. It's that, I should have the quotes ready to go. It's that preparation and purification that makes us most receptive to the experience from the divine self. Here we go. Here's a quote. Those who practice philosophy in the right way are always indeed most eager to liberate self, and this liberation and separation of the soul from the body is the self-study and exercise of the philosophers. What an interesting defense he's making of philosophy. And a case for what it is. Because part of our quest here is to not only distinguish what philosophy is, but what it isn't. All the way through, that's been our quest. Because we don't just learn or perfect our understanding, we have to purify ourselves from the false beliefs that might drag us down. And one such false belief about philosophy is it's about opinions. Not only that, people tend to defend that false belief about philosophy because they love their opinions. Everybody loves their opinions. One of my famous philosophy jokes is so many people call themselves a realist, which is another way of saying, I agree with all of my own opinions. I think that's hilarious. Here we go. Here's another quote. We shall live, while we live, we shall be closest to knowing when we neither associate nor commune with the body more than it is necessary. We must purify ourselves from it until the divine self should liberate us. Wow. And thus being purified by having been liberated of the phronesis of the body. We don't know what phronesis is yet, but we're getting there. We shall be likely to be with such a kind, and through ourselves, we shall know all that is pure. This is likely to be the truth. Big quote there. You're going to have to need a big car to fit that on a bumper sticker, but it's worth having. And there's some strange symbol. I don't know why there's a strange symbol there. So that's what we've been doing. We've been learning about what philosophy is. And notice, that joke, a realist is somebody saying, I agree with all of my own opinions. Because, well, they're speaking about their opinions. So there's something ist. They're a materialist or a relativist. They think the world is all physical. Everything is relative to opinions or something or other. But by saying it's real, by calling themselves a realist, they're saying, oh no, my opinions are the real ones. Which is funny because we are going through a process of establishing what exactly is real. Not through opinions, but through dianoia. And as we saw in that quote, that is still itself a stepping stone to the direct experience of that. A confirmation of our understanding, indirect experience.
Importing all preferences from home interface.
That drop was not necessary, Jarvis. Even AI wants to do it. Even sticks want to do it. Socrates has been saying, hey, by the way, even sticks seek that ultimate goal. To know the self, to be equal with the self. Of course, he says the word equal, but we have a question, equal with what? What is that to which all things are seeking being equal to? Is a question we've been exploring. Because one of the arguments for the existence of the soul that we've been looking at is, oh, by the way, the idea of learning. By the way, when you see two sticks, do you recognize them as being equal to each other? Oh, sure. But look closely, are they? Well, of course, nothing's ever exactly equal. That doesn't make sense. Then where did you learn the idea of equal, such that you can recognize it in sticks? Socrates says that's their purpose. That's the purpose. In that sense, everything that we perceive through our physical senses, we have a triad in our mantra, everything that we see, hear, and think, has a goal to remind us of that to which we are seeking to be equal with. In fact, sticks themselves reach out to be equal. So we have a question, equal to what? Equal to the next stick? Of course not. And so we looked at the idea of lesser, greater, and ultimate, or lesser, greater, and whole. If you're using the Phi ratio, the golden ratio, or lesser, greater, and equal. So something that we would call ultimate or maybe whole, Socrates is calling equal. Equal to what? And he's saying, by the way, that's one of the selfer terms. So it's an aspect of the self in being as we say, the other aspects are the other ideas, beauty, justice, equal is one of them. So Socrates is saying everything physical, even sticks, are yearning, reaching out to be equal to the self in being. And our perceptions are the same in that they each serve the same purpose to remind us of that which we're seeking. Because we are in a state of being humans and we forget. We're forgetting. And learning as remembering is something that Socrates has been speaking about his whole life, to the point where his friend Cebes recognizes it. After Socrates gives his doctrine, what philosophy is, the art and practice of dying, a purification, to be most like the divine, by separating from our physical senses as much as possible through our dianoia, which is some sort of exercise of the logos, which we've been learning. What the heck is the logos? And using it according to this mysterious dialectic. What the heck is dialectic? And how do we do it? Making us receptive to the divine self, initiating us is the word, into pure being. Separating the soul from all corners, out of the body, to practice in that way, to collect ourselves together when we're out of the soul, to be there as much as we can, both now and the future. That's the yoga that he presents to us in his doctrine. Okay, so very different than what philosophy is taught today, keep in mind. So we are seeing what philosophy is and what philosophy isn't. If philosophy doesn't involve that, Socrates is saying, oh, you might not be doing philosophy. You might, in fact, be a lover of the body. And we did a dialectic on that to see what follows if we're a lover of the body. So the conflicts, wars, civil discord, being flooded with illusions and foolishness, and distracting us, giving us no time to do philosophy. And the problem is, if we don't purify ourselves from the body and its physical senses, then even if we do have time to do philosophy, they come flooding in like a cacophony and drive us out of our mind. But Parmenides did point out when he was teaching us the dialectic, when Socrates was first learning philosophy, that this is going to be something that happens. We're going to have counterattacks. We're going to have objections. Keep them in mind. So let's bring up the quote. It's good to have the text as accurate as we can. So these are the nature of the objections. Collect yourself together, which is the same expression that Socrates is using here. Socrates heard from Parmenides, 135d. At the beginning of his career, collect yourself together, thyself, the thyself of the know thyself mantra and maxim of the Oracle of Delphi. Collecting yourself together and exercising more in that way that appears useless to the many, right? That's where our objections come from, the multitude, what we might call the NPCs, and is called by them empty talk. For if you do not, while you are still young, the truth will utterly elude you. And he also points out that we have to keep in mind the objections that come up. Permit the ideas of the beings to be in that realm of being that even sticks yearn for. Keep your mind fixed on all of the objections that come up, the counterattacks. Define each one of the ideas. That's what we call the exercise of dialectic. That's where to turn your dianoia. So there's our understanding. Allow each one of the ideas, allow that each idea of each one of the real beings, it's a mouthful. Allow that the idea, the beholding of each one of those real beings is always of the self. This is the power of dialectics. So I've got a lovely assortment of quotes that we're developing from the introduction to the dialectic and also from Socrates giving us his doctrine now. So these aren't, notice they're not opinions, they're not theories. Notice there's no debating happening. All of the things that we're told philosophy is, it's not there. And this isn't just from some dude. This is from the big dog, Socrates. The big dog. Do I have a big dog sound effect? He's the goat. He's the greatest of all time. Socrates, the goat, the greatest of all time, is saying this. Not just some joker. All right. And what's interesting about this, we don't have to just believe him. Why? Because we are developing the arguments that show why this must be true. So fortunately, he's there with his friends Simmias and Cebes, varying levels of familiarity with Socrates' doctrine, with the philosophy, lived it to a certain level. We saw last time Cebes was able to use the dialectic a little bit, give his own succinct dialectic on why the soul must exist based on the idea of learning as recollection, but wasn't able to use it with another person yet. So Socrates jumped in to use the dialectic in real time with Simmias, who was less familiar with that logos of learning as recollection. So, very different than what we're told philosophy is. It's not about theories, it's not about fighting, it's not about debating, it's not about pushing your beliefs. It's about something that everyone can share in, dialectic. Dialectic, about understanding, dianoia. And even understanding is a kind of purification, allowing us to verify for ourselves. So what's missing in our schools, what's missing in the way we're taught philosophy, why is it that we need to awaken philosophy? We miss the two essential ingredients, understanding and knowledge. Dianoia, notice, not understanding directed to our senses, the opposite, a purification from our senses. So it's the opposite of physical science. Or modern philosophy, where they induce theories based on what they observe. Why? Because these things that you observe are there, according to Socrates, to point you to the realm of being, where the self-equal is, where the self-justice is. Don't learn about justice from saying, we should all have socialism because Norway does. That might be a nice stepping stone. Of course, it's much better than what a lot of places have. But say, okay, but what would be the ideal that even Norway's way of looking after its people, the justice in the state of Norway, even that might fall short of. That even that he reaches out for. What's the ideal? Don't learn about beauty from just lining up a bunch of beautiful things and inducing a theory. Start there, sure. But develop an understanding of beauty itself, especially from the logos that fortunately we have through Plato, which is why we're reading Socrates' words through Plato. We're so fortunate to have these texts because they share the logos. Do that with as little attention, phronesis, to your physical senses as you can, so that you're using pure reasoning. And that's a kind of doorway to the separation of your soul from your body. Enter that realm of being, perhaps. Or if there's a transition from the soul itself to being itself, you can do philosophy better in that state. You're less interrupted. So if you don't need your senses to do philosophy, such that you can do it better of being a soul out of body, we can see, we mustn't need our senses to do it. That's what Socrates is saying the dialectic and the logos is for. And of course, we can directly confirm it. This idea of understanding and confirmation reflects back to what we saw in a brief introduction into how we can use the dialectic to not just do this, reach our destiny and connect with providence, but also purify ourselves from our problems. Socrates says the association with our body. not just being in our body, but associating with it, identifying with it. This is me, causes our troubles. But he did point out, hey, listen, you can gain a degree of purification, just like you can gain a degree of phronesis or virtue without quite finishing it. Meaning, he talked about temperance through intemperance, mastering some of your desires only to be mastered by others. So it's a degree of temperance, but you're really just going to get better at your vices, the ones left over. We talked about how, well, we need to direct, or what should we be directing our attention to if we have a freedom from our physical desires? Well, maybe something non-physical. Maybe the logos and being, maybe understanding and knowledge, dianoia and nous. So we see pairs all the way through. This big pair of logos and nous, dianoia and knowledge, understanding and knowing. This is where we're supposed to be directing our desires to. And he said, Socrates says, so vice is kind of not the opposite of the virtues, but a shadow of the virtues. There is a kind of phronesis there. And just like the other virtues, like wisdom, which we saw when we looked at book 7, is phronesis directed towards the body. The clever man, they're useless for philosophy, but clever can most look out for his own interests, directing his understanding to the body. So, vice has some elements of virtue, but is the shadow or outline. So, it's not the opposite, it's a kind of distortion or reflection. And we looked at the metaphor of the mirror. Your mirror reflection isn't a lie. It's not the opposite of you. It's very close to you in a lot of ways, but it's missing the most fundamental aspects, the higher aspects of what it means to be you. Your thinking, your will, your desires, your mind, your understanding. In fact, all the things that are missing in vice. The highest aspect. And what's the highest aspect of the virtues? Well, logos and nous. Understanding and knowledge. The most highest things. Literally the highest experience as knowledge. Experiencing the realm of being. Which is what we're perfecting ourselves to have. To know it for yourself. You don't have to believe anyone else, even if they wear funny hats. Even if they speak in tongues. You don't have to believe them because you know it. You're there. But also you can recognize it and understand it when you're there because your method was through understanding. That's why philosophy is the ideal, is the archetype of the spiritual journey. Of course, sometimes we have to be careful in saying that because all humans are also going through a process of disidentifying with what they most hold dear. So, to hearing the truth might cause a negative reaction. How dare you? This loyalty to the truth, which motivates ourselves for our growth, has its usurper of the throne. There's someone else that sits in the place that true being should be, and so we can be fiercely loyal to our ignorance. So we can see, while Socrates is outlining in the Phaedo, our learning is a movement from opposites, a forgetting to remembering, that's learning. Forgetting knowledge to remembering knowledge. Just like everything in the physical world of becoming is a movement from opposites, from lesser to the greater, and then greater to less, growing and then decaying, living and then dying, coming to be alive and coming to die. So being dead and being alive, coming to be dead, coming to be alive. Right, the cyclical nature of reincarnation. While that's true of the physical world, there is also a different kind of relationship between two things which isn't opposites, but lesser and greater. The lesser, greater, and equal, or lesser, greater, and whole, logos, analogy relationship that we've been seeing in our reflection. Right, our reflection is dimensionally lesser than our three-dimensional self. It's not an opposite. We don't come from our reflection into our third dimension and then back and forth. We don't do that. And the vices are not the opposite of the virtues. There's a lot of good qualities in someone who's very good at doing vice, tyrant, You can act out in the most evil ways. It's a distortion or reflection that lacks the fundamental aspects, the most important elements. So, if there is a fierce loyalty to our ignorance, our false idea of what we think it means to be knowing, what we think it means to be wise, like just turn on YouTube and you'll be flooded, well, at least I am, flooded with all these tyrannical looking blokes, big muscles saying, this is what it means to be an alpha and I'll fight you, I'll punch you in the face if you disagree with me. And someone says, well, actually, I think living a successful life is more about having a loving connection with your family. And then the big muscly guy goes, I'm going to fight you, you goose. How dare you? No, you got to be rich and muscly. Yeah. Lover of the body, right? But he's willing to fight the other person completely irrationally. There's no reason to fight. You're on stage at some podcast conference or whatever. You're completely out of your mind. This is what Socrates said. The love of the body and the desires, fears, and illusions and foolishness of our physical senses flood in even when you should be having a philosophical conversation and drive you out of your mind. So we have to be careful that while we are purifying ourselves through philosophy, we're applying what we learn of our dialectic to what's false. Purifying and perfecting ourselves, perfecting our purification, to see what is sitting on the throne. Because we're either motivated by truth and phronesis, as Socrates is saying, is the true desire of all men, or we have something else motivating us that's there that we don't know is there. The image, the shadow, the outline, the reflection, something that appeared to be wise, good, true, beautiful, equal, all those self-equalities that we are striving to get, not through understanding and knowledge. Remember, the two highest aspects are removed. Our problems don't help you develop understanding and knowledge because that would free you from that. Imitation. To have the shadow, to be the outline. Imitation. Imitating our teachers, especially when we were young and vulnerable. Especially when we didn't have ourselves the logos and dialectic to ask questions. So we need to purify ourselves from those. So one of the questions that we're going to play with today, which is the opposite and which is the reflection? For as we do, as the quest of philosophy, we seek excellence. So we take what we learn, we turn it about onto what's most important. The last aspect, the last part of the dialectic is what you learn. You go back to the start, and can you reflect on the most interesting, the most important subjects in a new way with what you've learned? Well, if Socrates is saying everything in the realm of becoming is from its opposites, he also said there's a kind of shadow as well, which we recognize as the lesser to the greater, which is needed, which is part of reality. The self reflects into being, reflects into the soul, reflects into the physical universe. We have a reflection in the mirror. We have a shadow. So the lesser to greater, which is needed for thinking, for analogy. You understand the greater, king is with people, by the lesser. And in fact, you can even go, which is a shepherd is to a sheep, as a king is to his people. But you can even go to that third level, lesser to greater to whole, what I was calling ultimate, because there is a different self idea of whole, that's whole in part. But we're saying lesser to greater to whole, so we're not equal. Lesser greater to equal is an interesting one. You could use that. Or lesser greater to ultimate. So push the analogy to the ultimate. That's called anagogic movement. We looked at the anagogic triad of the gods: Apollo, Aphrodite, and Hermes. Anagogic means upward moving to our ultimate goal. What were they? Basically, Apollo, philosophy. There's a harmony, there's a rhythm in this game that we look for. When you realize that you can gain insights, there is a significance in your life. This is not just dry and dead. This actually is going to awaken a higher state of being for you, and you love that, and it motivates you and it inspires you. That's why we want to do philosophy. We don't want to be forced to do it. We want to love it. We want to have something that moves us, in the best kind of way. That's Aphrodite. And where does it lead us? To the ultimate, the ruling term, the top of the triad, top of the triangle, Hermes, dialectic. So this is from Proclus's Elements of Proclus's Theology of Plato. Proclus, guy who taught at the academy hundreds of years after Plato, unified his mythology, how Plato specifically used the gods to talk about, to mythologize, to characterize, to represent through analogy the principles of philosophy. This is anagogic. So if we want to anagogically move from shepherd is to sheep, as king is to people, what's the highest one? That's where we're headed. Even sticks. The self is to our soul, maybe. So apply it to the highest. We have a question: which are the opposites that we move towards, and which has this lesser greater whole, or lesser greater equal ultimate? This lesser greater, I'll say lesser greater equal. Keeping in mind, we know we don't mean equal to sticks. We mean equal to that which everything seeks to be equal to. One of the self-er terms. And Socrates says, hey, lesser greater equal is in the same category as beauty self and justice self and goodness itself. And holiness as well. Interesting. Doesn't often mention holiness. In one of the texts he talks about it's what the gods even want. So even the gods want to be equal to it. So taking that idea, which is the opposites, which is this lesser greater equal, applying it to our highest terms, what did we, in this summary right now, in this reflection today, what did we point out as the most significant terms for philosophy? Dianoia and nous. Understanding, which involves logos and dialectic, and direct experience, noesis, ousia. What were the things missing in the virtues? Logos and being. Understanding and knowledge, same pair again. What are the two things missing from the shadow of philosophy in our modern world, causing all of the problems that we are suffering through right now as part of our historical and human species development of evolution? What's missing from that philosophy? What's missing from our schools? What's missing from every justice system, economic system, even in Norway? Logos and knowledge. The most important, highest terms in everything. And without it is the cause of the worst vice. Because vice isn't an absence of virtue, it's the shadow of virtue. So if these are our most important terms, let's take our question that we're developing through the Phaedo in the section that we're just reading. Socrates explaining, hey, everything in being is movement from opposites. But what we're interested in is learning knowledge, which is recollection, which is a proof that the soul must have learned it somewhere if we're recalling it, which means it can't have been in this life because, well, you don't see knowledge, so it must have been in the previous life. It can't have even been at birth because then everybody would know it. And by the way, if you know it, you'd be able to give a logos of it, he said. There again, knowing and logos, the same too. And he said, hey, can anybody give a logos about true knowledge? And the guy said, well, just you. I'm afraid tomorrow when they kill you, there'll be no one left. So therefore, did we learn it at birth? No. Do we learn it in our physical senses? No. But we do learn it. Therefore, we must have learned it somewhere. It must not have been here. It must be in our soul somewhere. We must have got it before we were born. So, is learning, is knowledge, is recollection one of those movement between opposites as part of what we do in the physical world? We go from lesser to greater, we grow and then we decay. We get hungry and then we get full, and then we get hungry, then we get full. Or is it the other kind of relationship? The shadow, the distortion, the dimensional distortion for our which of those two kinds of relationships, sort of equal but opposite or different levels, lesser, greater, equal, is our most important terms. That's what we always do. Whatever we learn here, apply it to what's the most significant. That's meaning. We're not learning philosophy so we can debate bros or be debate bros ourselves. We're not learning philosophy so we can be a jerk, so we can get good at our vice and make other people feel bad. We're trying to include people. It's everyone's game. It's how we solve our problems, all human problems. It's how we remove war, civil discord, and what was the third thing he said? Let's get the text right. Which is part of the process. Having the exact logos is a kind of purification of our own interpretation, our own internal act of distorting what's actually there. So every now and again, I might forget a word and I go, actually, let's nail it down, which is a kind of repetition. Because what are we supposed to be doing? Other to other as philosophers? We are supposed to be looking for a dialectic in our notes that has other to other. Yeah. If philosophy exists, other to other, what do we do with each other? Believe that doctrine and repeat it. We repeat it and test it and verify it through dianoia, nous, and understanding. Cool. Fun. So, here we go. War, civil discord, and battles. That was the triad, he said. Let's make sure that it's exactly right. Yeah. So, we want to include people, which means as we learn, we apply it to what's most significant, so we can make it meaningful to us. It's not a dry thing. And what's most meaningful? Well, ourselves. Or our stupid problems that get in the way. Until we realize they're not stupid, there's actually part of a great higher order that necessarily must involve a cyclical reincarnation process to make sense of why there is a justice beyond the apparent injustices if you only see this one incarnation. So if it's necessary to see the justice and the beauty even in our problems, it might be necessary to see the immortality of the soul. Thus, the importance of this argument that Socrates is having. It's important for it to remove our problems and also to get there and experience it and verify it for ourselves. So, what are the two most important things? Well, self, of course, always applied to the self. That's the most important. We keep our mind on the ultimate self at all times, which is why we talked about having Xenophanes' question with us in our pocket at all times. It's like if you're in a game, you have a staff, but you might have a gem that has like an aura effect over you at all times. A buff. The special gem that we have, that we carry with us at all times, giving us a buff, giving us an aura, is Xenophanes' question that comes even more ancient a artifact than Parmenides. Parmenides taught Socrates, Xenophanes taught Parmenides. So we are so lucky to have this ancient artifact in our inventory, carrying with us, which has a kind of buff. In the chat, people have been saying how it's been affecting their consciousness, which is this question. Where's Xenophanes? What is the buff? What is the ancient gem? Looking for it in our notes. We have so many notes. We've done so much work. Yay for us. Here we go. It is the whole that sees and hears, which we turn into what is, make it a question. That gives it the buff effect. It has the effect on our consciousness. It's not just understanding, it's supposed to have an effect on our consciousness, our way of feeling, our way of being in the world and out of the world. What is the whole of seeing, hearing, and thinking right now, and what is watching right now? The whole of seeing, the whole of your sense, the whole of your seeing and hearing and perceiving, the whole of your seeing, hearing, and thinking. Can you feel it as a whole without paying attention to foreground and background, without distinguishing particulars? What is that? What is the whole through which you're perceiving? And what's watching even that? So we could even say, what is the whole of seeing, hearing, and thinking, and what is the one self that's watching? Or what is the whole of self? What is the whole of mind? Make it your own. But this is a way of applying everything that you learn to this question, makes it meaningful, makes it significant to you. Sharpen up, hone it like a sword. What is the whole of seeing, hearing, and thinking? Or what is the whole self? What is the whole of mind, seeing and hearing and thinking? Whatever for you makes it your own. And what is the one self? What is the self? What is it? That's seeing, that's watching. Make it your own. So this allows us to make it something meaningful. And what did we declare was most meaningful and has the greatest negative impact if it's missing? In our vices, in temperance, in wisdom? What is it that we're most loyal to that causes us to lash out against people engaging in philosophy? To be the most unjust person? What would be the most unjust thing? To silence philosophy, to silence the truth, the very truth that even you are after. All people are seeking self-phronesis, according to Socrates. Whatever the heck that is, we're still discovering that. But the self-truth, which is in self-being, which we get through the self-logos. So silencing people's words, silencing questions, silencing reflection on the nature of mind, nature of being. Oh, the physical world exists. Shut up. Don't you say that you can experience heaven? No, that's the most unjust you can be. And finally, how dare you say that there is something beyond even God that you're saying is the self? The arrogance, the hubris. Hubris is a fun word because it's just, you can throw it in everywhere and it makes you sound smart. Well, I think it was hubris. Yes, hubris, yeah. I find it funny. It's one of those, I don't know, philosopher jokes, I guess, or maybe just Jed jokes. It's used so often that whenever anyone says hubris, just silently nod and agree. Yeah. Hubris, arrogance. The arrogance to say that there is a self. What's the significance? Well, you have to believe in God. You have to make a case for God. You have to show some sort of arguments to justify your faith, and then fleecing the sheep of their money or whatever, however you're using the idea of God to do whatever. But do you have to believe in the self? You are a self. Do I have to make an argument to tell you that you are? You've got a self. I'm not sure. Of course not. It's the most immediate. It's the most intimate. It's the most personal. But also, the irony of philosophy, it's also the most universal. It's the most immediate, but it's the most transcendent. It's the most immanent, but the most profound. That is the greatest puzzle of philosophy. To see both. To see all of the dimensions at once. Imagine. In fact, do it. Imagine it. Using your imagination is part of a yoga of philosophy. So, to act most unjust is to silence that idea of the self, or to silence the idea that there are self-ideas existing in being, or to silence the logos, the very three things that we call the self-triad. Go to our triads. Here we go. Here's one. Excellence triad. Excellence of self-logos, or the self-triad. Self-being or mind, truth. So we're developing our understanding through our logos and dialectic to experience being or mind, also called truth. In fact, all of the selves and ousia are there, according to Socrates that we just read. And of course, we have to permit all of these even to be itself of the self. The first hypothesis of Parmenides. So the most unjust would say, how dare you say that you are worthwhile? Just the king, just God. Get on your knees. The most unjust would also be to sacrifice. Don't ask questions. Why did God? No, don't ask questions. What was God doing before he invented the world? Inventing a hell for people like you who ask questions. We want to encourage questions, develop questions, purify, perfect, polish up our questions. We want to encourage, show people the nobility of themselves, for themselves through, as CB said, through good questions and good answers from you draw answers from people's selves. That's how come we know. That was Simmias's demonstration of his idea that the soul must be immortal because of the idea of learning as remembering. We must have learned it somewhere. The soul must have experienced it somewhere. Simmias said, I'm not familiar with that. Can you say more? And he said, well, yeah. Dialectic, right? If someone is really skilled at asking good questions, they can draw out of oneself the ideas in being through the use of the self-logos. But he wasn't able to do it, so Socrates jumped in. That's where we are in the text. So we want to allow the ideas of being to exist. Realize, in fact, these three elements, perfect your self-logos through dianoia, applied to being all of the ideas, and recognize they're all of the self as our final goal. That's what Parmenides explained to us was the dialectic. Permit the ideas of real beings to be. Keep your mind fixed on the objections and others like them. Define each of the particular ideas, that's dianoia, and also allow each one of them to be of the self. That's dialectic. So, if what is most just is being in that kind of a way, opposed to these sort of things, which often is the kind of view of philosophy we have nowadays, the distortion, it highlights the significance of these things here. Right? Equally so, what did we say was missing in the virtues that makes them vices? Self-logos and truth, being, applied to being. What's missing in philosophy nowadays? Self-logos applied to being. Hey, there's no being. That would mean there's an objective truth. No, we want opinions. I'm an objective relativist. I'm a nominalist Kantist. I'm a Hegelian crucifixist. I don't know. All sorts of crazy names to define different sorts of opinions. What are we doing in philosophy according to Socrates? Perfecting this by separating ourselves from the body, and as a method of separating from the body, so we can experience truth and bring with us our development of our virtues so we can upgrade to self-phronesis. Therefore, these are the two most important things. Therefore, so our question that we're learning about this one here, the self-logos idea coming into existence from opposite of the self idea is generation. So here's a question we're going to add to our question sack. Question: is it opposites or is it lesser, greater, equal? And that's our question related to what we were seeing in generation. So I'm suggesting let's apply it to what's most important. That's what makes it meaningful. What's most important? Knowledge. And we're seeing we can learn knowledge. We can see that it also that involves remembering. Knowledge is remembering what we know. Learning Or that kind of learning. Self-ousia. Being. This is the truth that we seek, according to Socrates. And all the selves. All selves. The honorific. And also, what also is most important? Well, not just knowing, but how do we get there? Dianoia, understanding. And what are we learning about understanding? Logos. Dialectic. Separated from senses. From the physical. From body, let's say body. So here, we're developing an understanding of these two key terms. Now, let's add to that a question. Which is it? Because we were just talking about how we can be fiercely loyal, causing us to act in the most vice way to our ignorance and oppose philosophy, oppose the idea of objective truth, oppose everybody coming together in a shared understanding based on what is universal. We can, no, screw you. Let's just kill each other because Jesus, right? Not just any religion, any group that separates, that is opposed to philosophy. I reckon, opposed to the idea of a universal inclusion of all things in understanding, opposed to ignorance, images, beliefs of someone else, which is all opposed to these two things. We are fiercely loyal to it. People can be super jerks. Think of the Crusades. Think of the Holy Wars. People can be real jerks about this. Which shows that there is a certain amount of power and loyalty and even courage in certain ways, but what they're being loyal to is the exact problem they have and we have. Loyal to that which neglects these two things. So, is that fierce loyalty to what is the most dangerous, the most vice, which that's called ignorance. Now, ignorance in philosophy is not obliviousness or forgetting. So we have, let's zoom in a little bit. We have forgetting to remembering. And this is knowledge. And this is learning. This is learning. This is a doctrine of learning that we're on. So I'm adding a question into where we are right now. But we also recognize, hey, part of the human condition is we have to purify ourselves from something else. Ignorance. Our unknown, destructive loyalty to what we believe is truth, being, justice, beauty, etc. That, so we don't need this in brackets, just say it. That causes our worst injustice. Unknown destructive loyalty to what we believe is truth, being, justice, etc. So all of the beings that we said that we're interested in learning about, that causes worst injustice. Now, injustice, of course, is the opposite of justice, but you could also say causes our ugly actions, causes our lies. So we can also say, or our vice. So we can say, well, part of what we're doing here is this movement from forgetting to remembering. And that's how we acquire knowledge or recall knowledge. But you can also say there's also a kind of movement from ignorance, what we think is true and we're loyal to, the cause of our destruction, all of the problems on the planet, essentially, the root cause of them, to knowledge. So which is it? Which is the opposite and which is the reflection? Is ignorance to knowledge the opposite? Is ignorance the opposite of knowledge? Or is forgetting the opposite of knowledge? So obliviousness. And equally so for logos. And no, different color. And for understanding. So what is the opposite of understanding? There's a question. What is the opposite that we move into, that we move from into understanding in our world, our incarnation, our world of becoming, and let's not use white, and what is its lesser, greater, G-R-E-A-T, lesser, greater, equal, reflection, or distorted reflection. That we are here to purify ourselves from. So if this movement of opposites is a kind of learning or perfection, from forgetting to remembering, from not having knowledge to gaining knowledge, from being open and receptive and curious and watching these videos and sharing it as much as you want to be, and sharing it with your friends and sharing it with your teachers, from an open state of realizing you're unaware to knowledge. If that's what we're moving through in our realm of becoming, could ignorance, our unknown destructive loyalty, it's not really easy to read. Let's put it in white. Our known. We're unaware of it until we surface it in this quest. Hey, especially if you grow up with a lot of those characteristics, if you're really strong, you're really beautiful, you're really rich, you got a lot of good connections, you're really powerful, you can remain unknown your whole life. Think of a figure in the public eye who has these vices in the worst possible ways, but has never had to address them because of the luxury that he grew up in, he was born into. Therefore, being in this philosophical quest can surface the problems that we're here to resolve ourselves from. Unknown, destructive loyalty. We have an unknown, destructive loyalty. So much that we're willing to, that us dumb humans, not dumb, usurped. There is something sitting in the great throne that can be the throne of knowledge. Self-phronesis requires this initiation into the experience. And we want to hold on to that in the ups and downs, courage, desire it just so we can master all desires that really desire this, temperance. Use it as our paradigm, wisdom. Do it at all times, justice. You need to hold on to it and protect it and cherish it. So there's something in our soul that does that. Only there's some pretender to the throne. Boo. Causing our problems. We're not evil. We have what we need for this. There's just a pretender to the throne. There's something usurping the throne that we are fiercely loyal to. That's the problem. Unknown destructive loyalty to what we believe is truth, beauty, being, etc. All the Usia terms that are our subject of our dialectics. That's the cause of our problems. Ourselves, that manifests in our relationships, but also in our society, but also in our human freaking race. That's the significance of philosophy.
Wow. 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 Wow.
Even Owen Wilson says so. Okay, so this is a question I'm adding to the mix. Is it opposites or is it a lesser, greater, equal relationship? Applied to what's most significant, what have we been seeing is most significant? Knowledge and understanding. What do those words mean? Oh, we're adding all these too. Self-ousia, remembering, being, truth, all of the selves. In fact, that's the significance of taking all of those terms, bringing them together and giving it a new word, unifying it into a whole nous. That's why we need a Greek word, nous, because it incorporates all of those things. Hey, when you say, hey, I really, my friend Frank, he has a lot of knowledge. When you say knowledge, does it imply remembering what you soul knew immortally? Does it imply self-ousia? Does it imply being itself? Does it imply truth itself? Does it imply all of the selves and the ousias in being? No, we don't use knowing in that way. That's why we need to unify all these terms as nous. Equally so, understanding. When you say I understand something, are you meaning you believe it? Or you have a scientific belief? Or even maybe it's a prejudice, a false belief? Or it's faith? An unprovable belief you just have to take because of your book or your dude says so? Or when you say understanding, do you necessarily mean logos and dialectic applied to knowledge, separated from the body? If not, when we use understanding, we need to unify all of these terms. Dianoia. What is wrong with this thing? All of these terms together. Some people draw this diagram really beautifully. Dianoia. This is the significance of words, language, logos. Right? So I'm adding this question, which is, as we go through, as we learn about, as we follow Socrates' argument, which we're going to nail down now, apply it to knowledge and understanding. Which is forgetting to remembering, which is ignorance to knowledge. And for understanding, what would be the opposite that we're moving into understanding from in our world of becoming? That's part of generation, but also what is its distorted reflection from the lesser greater equal? What would be the lesser if understanding is the greater? So I'm just throwing those questions into the mix because they're awesome and it's fun, and it will maybe illuminate something more about our process, our problems, our quest, and also the most significant terms, knowledge and understanding. In fact, if we answer those questions, included in our idea of nous, we could add, nous. What isn't it, or what's its distortion? Its distortion is this. Its opposite is this. So we can add it into our understanding of this term nous. It's not just remembering, it's not just self-ousia, it's not just being, it's not just truth, it's not just everything that we seek as a philosopher, as a human being, but it also has an opposite. It also has a distorted reflection or outline of a shadow, in Socrates' words. So, a lot of fun. On that note, let's jump back into the text and nail down the arguments that we're on. We did a fantastic dialectic on our dialectic, which was a dialectic on CB's dialectic. Dialectics all the way down. Turtles all the way down.
I love turtles.
CB's argument, if learning is recollection, as we heard from Socrates, or because we're friends with him and we've heard it a lot, we have to have necessarily learnt what we recalled at a previous time prior to our body. And therefore, it's impossible if our soul were not somewhere before she came to exist in this human form. Therefore, soul is likely immortal. And then we talked about, hey, that's a great dialectic. Yay for you. Good job, CBs. You've learned from Socrates, and good job, Socrates. Not only were you able to master the dialectic, you're able to be a good influence and beneficial influence on your friends. But then we say, well, how far has he come along? And we go down here in the context of the conversation. Oh yeah, so we did a little dialectic. Socrates is learning on his life in relation to CB's learning during that time he spent with Socrates. So we're learning more about how well Socrates did by doing a dialectic, rubbing it up against another idea, self and other. It's how we learn. We rub it up against another thing. Either it's opposite or it's lesser, greater, ultimate. These are the sort of two kinds of relationships that are really bubbling to the surface. It's either left and right, or it's becoming being oneself. It's either lesser, greater, ultimate. It's either a shadow or reflection, or it's an opposite, left and right, hot and cold. To rub two things together to learn about either how well CB's learned from looking at what Socrates was supposed to have done. And we saw that part of his instruction at the beginning of his journey was to, from his teacher, Parmenides, it falls on the ability of someone with good natural disposition to be able, so you've got to have a good state of mind. That requires the virtues, by the way, to learn that there's a certain kind for each idea that we do the dialectic to, and that of self-ousia, that applies to all of them. And they will deserve even greater admiration who, having made this discovery, shall be able to teach yet another person how to thoroughly well distinguish these particulars in an efficient way.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
In a sufficient way. So that thoroughly well distinguishing the particulars of the things of self-ousia, we already know because we've learned it together. That's called the dialectic. So we can use the dialectic to judge how well he's been able to influence his friend. So if Socrates is saying, hey, this is what you need to do, did he do it? Did he help somebody else thoroughly well distinguish the particulars of things relating to the self and ousia? Well, yeah, kinda. Because CB's did. He did a nice little dialectic. And it was pretty sufficient. Pretty, like, has the 4 parts. Followed the structure. Had the self logos terms. Was pretty even cost efficient with words. Polished it up nicely. So he must have been carrying this idea with him for a while. Must have seen the value of it as we are seeing the value of it. Because we want to know, hey, if this doctrine of philosophy, if it's not only the solution to all of our problems, both ourselves and the world, and it gives us the greatest happiness, it gives us truth, it gives us what we really desire, then, well, you better prove that the soul is indeed able to do this. Otherwise, the whole thing falls down. Show us that the soul is immortal. Show us that we can separate ourselves from our body and exist there and collect ourselves together there and function there and do something there and to a higher level of the game with greater humans and greater gods to have greater conversations, as Socrates was saying. Show us. To be shown it, you have to have some sort of proof or argument to show that it has to be this, has to be necessarily the case, or if you take the opposites, a contradiction follows. So this is a division step. Looked at that. What's the premise? What's the definition? What's the thing you're trying to prove? What's your hypothesis? How does it demonstrate itself? What's the consequence, or how does it function? And push the implications. If there's a contradiction through pushing the implications of its opposite, you can prove the other thing. Or if it's a logical necessity and beauty to what follows if you push the implications of the thing, then you can see why it must be the case. That's how we think. That's how we get convinced about stuff. Oh yeah, I see the logical necessity of that, and it's also a beauty in it. Interesting. And then we can, as a philosopher, jump in. Oh, what is that you saw? A logical necessity. Oh, that's justice. Is it? Yeah. Where did you learn justice, hey? Oh. That would really level up his question. What else did you see that was convinced you of this or that? Oh, there's also a beauty in it, how it fit together. Oh, Aphrodite, you say? What? And forget about Aphrodite. That's just a word that is used to mythologize the feeling of beauty and love for seeing how things fit together in our world, allowing us for insights and knowledge and states of consciousness development. That's what it is. Oh, really, is it? Yeah, but forget about that. You said you recognize the beauty in the argument. That was part of what convinced you, along with the self-justice or the logical necessity? Yeah? Have you ever seen a beautiful thing? Sure. Have you ever seen beauty itself? Oh. Then where did you learn beauty itself, such that you could recognize it in beautiful things? Oh, I don't know. Now we're in this. The theory of recollection that Simmias is asking Socrates to lay out for us. So, pushing the implications of the thing you're trying to define, seeing either its contradiction or the logical necessity and beauty of the arguments that follow, allow us to make a conclusion. There's our definition, demonstration, division, synthesis, analysis. He did it nicely. What's his definition? Learning is recollection. Forget about demonstration? Well, necessarily you learned it at a previous time. Push the implications of either the opposite. Okay, what's the opposite? Well, if you were not somewhere before you came to exist in human form, that would be an impossibility. Therefore, learn something about either the subject, learning, or what you're rubbing up against, the soul. Learning of the soul is recollection. Therefore, the soul is immortal. Bingo, bango, bongo. Pretty good. Pretty good. Good job, CBs. Give him an A. And let's see if his grade falls, because his friend Simmias says, let's jump into the text. His friend Simmias says to that, he interrupts, okay? He interrupts. He's not actually being spoken to. CB's just threw it out there, which is still good. But what proofs can you show me of these things? Remind me, because I don't recall right now. So, going back to how we use our knowledge through the dialectic of conversation, you start with the definition, which is normally we phrase it as a question. Hey, do you agree with this? Was it sufficient for you? Sufficiently efficient or whatever. Sufficient. So you got to ask a question. And then Simmius has to answer. Judge whether or not the definition was sufficient. Okay, yeah, we could move on to the next portion of the conversation. No, I didn't quite follow. I said, I don't quite follow, right? And then Seebees has to judge that answer. Was that answer sufficient? If Simmius said, yeah, no, I get it. You remember things like you remember your school notes. Yeah. That's what learning is. You remember the notes from school. No, not efficient, not sufficient. So you have to judge the question as the other person, and yeah, you have to judge that other person's answer. Was it sufficient or not? If not, you have to give a demonstration. Hey, the definition wasn't enough. Give a demonstration. And then if the demonstration isn't enough, divide it up into its arguments of what follows. So I can see that it has to be beautiful and logically so. Or divide it up into what follows if its opposite is true. So I can see a contradiction. Right? And this is where we get our idea of why don't the politicians care? Like, they're contradicting themselves. Oh, why do we want to see that a politician or someone in authority cares about when they contradict themselves? It's the division stage of the dialectic. And if you reject contradictions, you are rejecting truth, logos, understanding, everything that makes us rational. Why? Because how else will you prove something is true? Well, through knowledge, of course, but until you get to the direct experience of the realm of being, through reasoning, through understanding. Well, how do you show whether or not arguments are true? Either what must be a logical necessity or an element of beauty that follows from the arguments of if it is, or a contradiction that follows if it's not. Oh, and we catch up politicians who contradict themselves. Oh, you say that, there shouldn't be corruption, but then you deal in insider trading. We want there to be, we are upset. One of the failings in society is we don't go from that into the conclusion. That's step 3, division. Step 4, conclusion. Better understand your law, better understand your principle, better understand whatever it is you're fighting for by showing that it can't be that way. You can't pass that law. You can't do that thing because you're contradicting yourself. And what's happening in our current society? A lot of politicians and rulers or whoever else don't care. They don't give a flying F. Oh, I don't care if I contradict myself. I don't care. They should care. We should care. Because they're destroying truth, reason, understanding. Oh, I don't need to give an argument. I can contradict myself. I can say one thing and do the other. I can be a hypocrite. I can say, I don't know, that everyone should be poor, but I'm the one who's rich. You should go to jail if you are corrupt and engage in insider trading. Oh, but I can do insider trading. Wages should not be increasing for everyone else. Oh, but my wages should. All right. Contradiction, hypocrisy. And this is one of the causes for the state of problems that we're in. We don't value the dialectic. We don't recognize the dialectic. As soon as there's a contradiction that follows, hey, therefore, let's look at your principle now and change it. We need to learn it. Otherwise, we are stupid idiots rushing towards our destruction and major corruption and all of the terrible suffering that we're following as a result. But also for ourselves. Hey, what do we need to do? Change our minds. It's easy to point at politicians and other people who've never gone through this process, but us ourselves, we're also in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. It's not us versus them. Difference is, we have what we need to change our mind. From what? What we thought was true, our unknown destructive loyalty to what we believe is truth. If it shows that it can't be the case, we have to either from the beauty and necessity or justice of what is, or the contradictions or inconsistencies or hypocrisies that follow from what isn't, we have to change our minds, which can be one of the hardest things to do. But we need to do it. It'll make us better, happier, more just, more successful, more able to reach our most meaningful goals. And how do we do that? That's the division step of the dialectic. They show what happens, if it is or it isn't, and then judge whether it was sufficient or insufficient. So the idea of judging and sufficiency, the two big ones, keep coming up over and over again. So when we do a dialectic on this, whether or not the soul has to be immortal, we have to change our mind. If the division stage, the arguments, hey, if you already have experienced the immortality of your soul, you don't even have to go there. Oh, just the definition, the soul is immortal. Yeah, I know that. You can move on. If you've had a touch of that, if you have an inclination, if you have some experiences in whatever you've done, yoga or meditation or any whatever, I'm kind of there, but can you give a demonstration just so I can nail it down? I'll give you a brief argument. Yep, sufficient, move on. Or, as for Simius, not enough. Can you divide it up into its arguments? Because I haven't experienced it yet. I need to have a logic, I have to develop a hypothesis. Because understanding is all hypothesis until you experience it. So I need to see why this hypothesis is logically necessary and beautiful, so I can change my mind. That's the big one. We need to change our mind. Literally, that's what learning is. We do things because we think it will change our mind. Because it will make us better. It will change our mind to make us happier. It will change our mind to make us smarter while we go to school. It will change our mind to make us more evolved, less ignorant, happier and more joyful. So we want to change our mind. And of course, the experience is the verification, but to get there, you have to develop your understanding, which is the division step in the arguments. Or just the definition might be enough to remind you. Or just the demonstration might be enough to remind you. But we also have to push this as we have to accept this and push it, really, and share it. Share it, not push it, share it. Because people will see the logical necessity for seeing the logical necessity of things. Otherwise, there's no reasoning. Hey, if you get a politician who just, I don't care, I already have my followers, they're loyal to a fault. I could shoot someone and they wouldn't have to put me in jail. But I'll go on a rant about how anybody who's a criminal, you need to be put in prison for their whole lives. No understanding, no rehabilitation. Just we should torture them. Yeah. Don't we want to torture the other team and everyone who's got brought up in that kind of unknown, destructive loyalty to ignorance, who thinks that torturing is part of what it means to be good because that's what happened to them? We'll go, yes, we will vote for you. You are our savior. But then they'll say, but I can go out in the street and shoot anybody. Yes, not applied to you because contradiction. We don't care about contradiction because we are not following you based on the logos, on understanding, on truth. We're based on you because you resemble our ignorance. You are a shadow. You are an outline of my dad, my mum, my priest, whoever it was from my culture, my religious figure. Hitler. Fierce loyalty to someone ignorant, even though logically what he was doing was completely corrupt. Called himself the Socialist Party, even though being the least socialist person ever. Specifically, to lie, to trick people. But people supported him because he appealed to this. That's what we need to overcome. We have to replace a loyalty to our ignorance with an understanding of the truth and what leads us to the truth, specifically this, the understanding of the dialectic, such that as soon as anybody in any position of authority shows there's a contradiction of what follows, or there's a logical and beautiful necessity of their other position, they need to change their mind. Otherwise, they are, by definition, corrupt. By definition. Should learn this in day one at school. What does it mean to be corrupt? First, let's learn the dialectic. To go against what follows in the division step is corruption. Why? Because you're not serving the truth. The truth that's for all, that includes all. And by the way, that development through the logos to the truth makes you more compassionate, makes you more rational, makes you more able to understand the good and experience the good. Okay? This is what follows. So as we're learning the dialectic, all of that thing, that reflection, is what necessarily follows if the dialectic doesn't exist. If the dialectic doesn't exist in our world, we have disgusting corruption leading to the decay of society and the destruction of the human race and the suffering, torture, and murder of human beings. Or, as Socrates put it, war, civil discord, battles, killing ourselves, fighting and hurting each other, and we are afraid of death instead of seeking it in the best way. So we saw for ourselves in that little dialectic of what happens, what are the implications that follow if the dialectic doesn't exist? Corruption, no politicians not changing their mind, therefore no learning, no growth, no development, stagnation in ignorance that causes destruction, terribleness. That was a mini dialectic on what follows if the dialectic That was a mini dialectic on what follows if the dialectic exists. So, what does that mean? Well, we did the division step just there. Where are we? We just did the division step of the dialectic. Hey, definition. We need the dialectic. Should be taught at day one. We should teach it every day. Remind ourselves every day. That's how we solve problems and how we reach our highest goals. Someone's going to say, yep, I follow. And then we have to, that was sufficient. And then we have to see if their answer was sufficient. So we start as a question, hey, do you think that we should all have dialectic? Let's actually write it out because it's fun. Let's try it. So this is a demonstration of what we are trying to define, the dialectic. We are seeking to define. Remember, definition and demonstration. And it's a dialectic on dialectic. In conversation. So, what do we start with? Definition, as is a conversation. As a question. And then we get an answer from our friend. The sufficient. So they are our friend. So that's person one. Person one. Then we have person two. Go a different color. Go blue. Person two. They have to judge as sufficient. As S-U-F-F-E. Sufficient or not? Okay? Yes or no? Sufficient or not? Opposite, opposite. So within the same realm, it's not greater or less. So this is one of our relationships. It's not the multi-dimensional relationship, lesser, greater, ultimate. It's opposite, sufficient or not. And what do we say? It either is or it is not. Sufficient or not, is or isn't. And another person has to, person one again, has to judge the answer. Judge that answer as sufficient or not, is or isn't again. Notice, we're seeing the same structure and dynamic of the dialectic play out at all levels. So here, sufficient or not. Hey, by the way, dialectic is A and B, if the thing is or if it isn't. So we're seeing is and isn't play out even in the parts. This is the understanding of reality as terms may vary or relations stay the same, or as above, so below. This is the ultimate to greater to lesser emanation that we've been talking about. It's not the opposite, which is on the same level, but the higher and lower. Okay? And then if it was not, if not, if not, demonstration. So let's highlight these ones. Let's highlight the key terms of the dialectic itself and put it in purple. What? Demonstration. And then after the demonstration, person one, person two comes back. Well, as a question, of course. We'll say as a question. Notice what have we been doing as philosophers our whole journey? Developing questions, perfecting questions, polishing questions, getting skilled at questions, leveling up our question skill tree. Right? Here's a picture of our question sack. What does it mean to be a philosopher? This guy. What does he have? Question sack.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So, questions are coming into it as well. It's how you use it with your friends. Dialectic in action. So, where are we? If not, demonstration as a question. And then person two comes back and says, hang on a second, that was sufficient or not. So again, person two, judge as sufficient or not, is or isn't. And so on into the next stage. So let's... And then person one has to judge that, because he's the one leading the conversation. Judge answer. And then if not, or as sufficient. Hey, was that a sufficient answer? Or can I sense he's not being honest? Or was his answer, oh yeah, I get it, you mean this? No, that wasn't sufficient. You haven't really grasped. You have not yet grasped what I am saying. You are not picking up what I'm laying down, good fellow, is or is not. If not, division. And questions as questions. Questions, now plural. Questions as we go. Because we're leading, we're going together. We're team, we're pal. We're pals, buddies. We're all selves, we're all humans, we're all on the same quest. We are not to be divided. Because what brings us together ultimately? The self. So, that's the conversation, and we are applying this to a dialectic on the dialectic. So we would have to say, we can say, in our dialectic on dialectic, we have in the category of, so we got A, which is if it is, and B, if it is not, it isn't. If the dialectic isn't in our world, I mean, well, so we would have to say what it is itself. Just in a conversation, you'd be defining it. Hey, we need dialectic. Need dialectic in our world. In our world, at school, everywhere. Everywhere. And then so then somebody says, huh? So yes or no? Yes or no? Oh, yep, that was sufficient. So sufficient. Or not. That's person 2. And if not, that's person 1. And if not, person 2 gives us our demonstration. Which is a brief demonstration of why that's the case. Because it is needed to both, notice, both is and isn't, duad, both solve problems and reach highest meaningful good goals both individually and collectively as the human race. Okay. Now, that might be, you might be talking to someone kind of like Seabees who's got a bit of understanding, and that person will say sufficient or not. If not, division. Definition. And then division. Demonstration. Give a demonstration. Oh, why? Here's a demonstration. Oh, because you need to both solve problems and reach your highest, most meaningful and good goals, both individually and collectively as a race. Demonstration. If not, person 1 comes back in, which is you. and let me know in the chat how well it went. Others to others, or division. Now, in the conversation, you could go one of two ways. You could hit what it is or what it isn't. You could show the contradictions that follow or the problems that follow if it isn't, or what is logically necessary and beautiful if it is. So we could go this way. We could use B and say, if we don't have the dialectic, we have no understanding of how to change our minds, especially our lawmakers. And no ability to explain why contradiction, hypocrisy matters. And is the definition of corruption in reasoning and truth and understanding. Also, so that's definition and demonstrates STRA. So I recognize that in that division, I recognized a keyword, a self-a term. Oh, I'm using the term definition. So that jumps out at me. And because I am learning the dialectic, or I'm the A side, okay, keep going. If there's a definition, there's probably going to be a demonstration. So this division of what follows if the dialectic isn't taught in schools, isn't shared around the world, isn't the first thing we learn, and therefore showing the contradictions or hypocrisy or the terrible implications that follow if it's not the case. In doing that, I recognize, I can keep going. So as I'm dividing, I don't have to just give a definition. I can also use demonstration and demonstrates itself as irrational and harmful. So this is the opposite of beneficial, of course. So if I was doing the A, I could say is beneficial and rational, but it's irrational and harmful. Functioning in our state. And I could keep going. Causing. So following the causal chain, which is the next step. So following the causal chain is the emanation through the dialectic from definition. Hey, if you don't understand what's corruption and reasoning and truth and understanding, and you don't understand the definition that hypocrisy and contradiction matters because of that definition, then it unfolds, it demonstrates, it causes irrational and harmful functioning in our state, which then causes. So causal chain is the unfolding, and we trace back the causal chain in philosophy to find the first cause and our purpose. First and final cause, because we're reverting on our first cause. It's called the first and final cause. Causing divisions and war and destruction and unjust laws and destruction of humanity and planet and mass suffering. Okay. So therefore, we can conclude we say person 2, zoom in a little bit. Person 2 has to chime in because it's a conversation. Person 2 has to see sufficient necessity and beauty of what followed in that vision stage. If the premise is, if the hypothesis is, let's say, if what was defined if the definition is or sufficient contradiction or absurdity or so the opposite of necessity, contradiction, opposite of beauty, absurdity. If isn't. Right? So this is the dialectic in action. Where do we start? Start with if you're in a conversation with someone, you start with your premise. This is my hypothesis. This is what I'm defining as my hypothesis. And we use the archetype of Parmenides. This is my hypothesis of the one self. That isn't in any way that you're aware of. That is, but doesn't exist. That's the first hypothesis of Parmenides. Okay, we start with that. This is my definition. Self to self. Definition itself. We need a dialectic in our world, in our school, and everywhere. That's the premise. And then that second person, the person you're talking to, P2, says he has to judge. So all the way, judging based on sufficiency. Sufficient or not. If it's not, you go on, oh yeah, no, I get it, yeah. I mean, I've watched these awakening philosophy podcasts. So that definition was sufficient. So how do you propose we implement this in our world, okay? Or it might not be sufficient as just the definition, because they might not be familiar with the logos of the dialectic. It really depends on how familiar with the logos of the subject they are. Not sufficient, okay. In which case, we go from person one, not person two, person one, then has to give a demonstration. Demonstration. Why? Oh, because it's needed to both solve problems and reach our highest meaningful good goals, both individually and collectively as a human race. That's why. And person two has to, again, judge whether it's sufficient or not. Then, of course, we have to judge whether their answer was sufficient. Like, are they really trying to be nice, or they're too scared to tell the truth or whatever? So every step we judge the questions and judge the answers based on whether it was sufficient or not. Okay? And then, it wasn't sufficient. That demonstration of saying that it's needed to both solve our problems and reach our highest goals, both individually and collectively. That was, okay, let me divide that up. Now you can take two. You can take A or B. A if it is, or B if it isn't. And in this particular one, I took if it isn't. If it is, we have more of an understanding of what sufficiency is. Sufficiency is, it was logically necessary and beautiful in a certain kind of a way. I recognize that in it. So that's the kind of sufficiency if it is, but the kind of sufficiency if it isn't. Do I have an emoji for if it isn't? If we give 2 thumbs down, yay. Contradiction or hypocrisy or an absurdity that follows. Terribleness that follows. So we took if it isn't, which is B, with no understanding of how to change our minds, especially for our lawmakers. So I'm thinking of some famous politicians who no longer care to be shown that they are hypocrisy, that they contradict themselves. They don't care anymore, which is a terrible state to be in. Why? Because there's no ability to explain why. If we did not teach dialectic in the world, what would happen if we don't? We would have no ability to explain why contradiction and hypocrisy matters, especially for our lawmakers, and is the definition of corruption in reasoning and truth and understanding. If we all knew it, hey, you can't contradict yourself. Sure I can. Just vote for someone else if you don't like it. No. Literally, you can't. That's corruption. You lose your job if you're corrupt. What do you mean it's corruption? Well, we all learn the dialectic at school, so you can't just say one thing and do the other. That's literally corruption. And not only is it defined as corruption, it demonstrates itself as irrational and harmful functioning in our state. That's why we care about not having corruption. You're not happy with just that demonstration? I'm doing a mini dialectic. Well, I'm going to divide it up. Hey, it causes division and war and unjust laws and the destruction of humanity and the planet and mass suffering if we allow people to just contradict themselves. Especially if they're an authority or lawmakers. That's why we care about corruption, because of it. It's a definition of corruption. It demonstrates itself in that way, and it causes these kinds of divisions. So we broke it down another way to division. So that's And then the second person has to, again, judge all the way to this judgment, judge whether it was sufficient. And we have more about sufficient. It was either necessary and beautiful of what followed in that division stage, what we just divided out, if the definition is, or in this case, sufficiently contradictory or absurd if it isn't. Therefore, together, we come together, the opposite of contradiction. We're not contradicting each other. We're not debating each other. We're not fighting each other. It's not us versus them, or woke versus, I don't know, rednecks, left versus right, Jews versus Palestinians, any of that crap. We're together. That's what, so we could have said, hey, we could do a dialect, a division could be on what follows if it is. We could have taken A and said, hey, we can come together. We can be harmonious. We can solve problems. I should write that more accurately. But that little reflection just there was, would it be A? If it is, we can be together, harmonious. We can unite as selves through understanding. And knowledge via the dialectic. So we could have done that as our division stage, and then person two would equally judge whether that division was sufficiently necessary in beauty. Is there a beauty in harmoniously uniting as a human species through understanding and knowledge, which is shared by all? Benefiting all? Benefiting all and the whole. Did that logically necessarily follow? If not, follow the reasoning. Was there a beauty in that? Abso-friggin-lutely. Don't you think so?
Wow. Wow.
And therefore, whether A or B, I mean, we could have broke down this A, that was like a quick division, but we could have broken it down into its definition, demonstrate division. We could have defined more accurately what dialectic is. We can outline a demonstration of how it functions. We can show these arguments more specifically in our divisions. It's really up to who you're talking to, where they're at, which is like a good idea is to ask them, oh, where are you stuck? Or what's your problem? Or what don't you follow? Because that will determine how much you break down. What kind of a division will you do? Will it be a simple argument? Or will you just give a quick, like this one? This one here, just a quick demonstration? Or will you define and then demonstrate and then divide it up some more? It's human, based on the person you're talking to. Because we're all humans, everyone is at a stage of development. Socrates is up there, and we're on some level underneath. But the fact that we have logos allows us to develop. That's why we're here. So, and then after this person two participates, answers, judges whether the division stage was necessarily and beautiful or contradictory and absurd if it was what wasn't, then person one jumps back in and does other. So this is the others to others. What do we do? Others to others? Do we write it down somewhere? Yeah, others to others. And then other back to self. The division or the key argument or idea or conclusion from the vision is applied. Whoop. Is APPLI applied back. This is our principle of reversion. We're going back. The self is the first and final cause. Back. Our learning is remembering. Back to what we knew. Learning is recalling what we knew. Going back. Lesser. Back to the greater. Back to the ultimate. It's not just opposites. We move from opposites, but this movement of opposites we have to use in a certain way where we can evolve. That's the nature of the spiritual. The 10 ox herding pictures are the stages of spiritual evolution or enlightenment levels. The progression back. Learning, according to this, is a recalling. Going back. And even in our understanding process of the dialectic, we're going back. Terms may vary, but relations stay the same. We're returning back to the definition. To conclude. We need to conclude. Why? Because we then move on about it. Notice the conclusion isn't definite. It's always a hypothesis in the realm of understanding. So you'll see in the text, at the end of his CB's little dialectic here, he said, it is likely to be some. So his conclusion, therefore, applying it back to the start, according to this doctrine, this little dialectic I did, the soul is likely to be something that is immortal. You don't know it until you confirm it through your experience. Knowledge and understanding, which is a likelihood, which is a hypothesis, an if, and you have to confirm it through your own experience. That's why it's mystical. That's why it's spiritual. That's why it's consciousness development. Right? It says likely here. So, back to our notes. Conclude about it as hypothesis. A likely hypothesis. Even if it's necessary and beautiful, it's still likely. We could realize there's a higher dimension, so even what's logically necessity of our dimension is still a shadow of a fourth dimension and fifth dimension and so on. But based on what we see, it is the most likely account. So notice, all the way through the Phaedo, Socrates is just saying, it's most likely, I'm most likely to fare well. I don't know yet until I get there. In fact, let's Socrates is saying, let's go back to the early days of the early parts of the text. Phaedo was saying of Socrates, that it seems, for me at least, I did not feel pity because Socrates appeared like a good daemon. He would fare well and he would be with divine providence if anyone else has. Him, if anyone, is still an if. If anybody else could have, it would be him. And Socrates says, hey, by the way, don't worry. Because even though I'm going to examine and mythologize about the journey to that place before the sun sets. Oh, so romantic. When I in his doctrine, he says, I shall be present with those gods who are wise and good, and then later with human beings who have completed life and are better than those here. I hope to reach the company of those good braves. To be well assured, if really I could confidently affirm this, if I could, if I hope, there will be good hope. There's something there. These are all likely hypotheses. And there will be of good cheer when about to die, to be of good hope that he will attain the greatest good there. This is the good kind of hope. It's not hope as in the way politicians and other scammers convince us, oh, you'll have hope, have hope, have hope. Lacking the logos, lacking a clear goal, lacking the clear steps, lacking the clear ability to implement that, lacking clear logos. It's the good kind. Good hope. If you practice it's the pursuit, it's the art and practice of dying and being dead. Pursuit and the contacting of, it's the desire and practice. You deserve that kind of death. Turning around the soul as far as you're able to, liberate from the body, attain self-mindfulness. It's how you grasp truth of the real beings, making it clear to the self. The body brings suffering and other kinds of pleasures. You seek to be the self. The soul of the philosopher disdains the body and seeks to be self according to self, which sounds like dialectic. We seek self-justice, self-beauty, self-good. All the beings, can't see it with your eyes. All of those beings are the ousia, whatever self you pick. It's contemplated by most accurately understanding, which is a hypothesis, what we're talking about. It's a hypothesis, but it makes you closest to the intuitive knowledge. That's the confirmation in your direct experience. Self-understanding, it's a purification, you liberate, enabling you to acquire truth and mindfulness only when being liberated. If there's a straight path along with the logos that we call dialectic, the body corrupts us, keeps us busy, need for sustenance, gives us diseases, impedes us, fills us with passions, desires, fears, illusions, foolishness. In truth, not any phronesis arises in the body, because the body fills us with desires that gives us nothing other than war, civil discord, and battles. Bum, bum, bum. The crap we do not want. And even we are enslaved to the care of the body and have no leisure for philosophy. And even if we do, the body and all of that crap, the fears, the desires, fears, illusions, foolishness, passions, pleasures, pains, fall in, and the clamor pouring in, driving us out of our mind. So we're not able to behold the truth. We want to be in a pure state, to behold the self-realities with the self-soul, because we are truly lovers of mindfulness. That's what we are. Whether you like it or not, is mindfulness. It's what we love. So I don't know what that is yet. We're still on the hunt for what mindfulness is, but we know there's a corruption, a mindfulness of the body that causes our vices. You intuitively know not with the body, but you have to purify ourselves until the divine self should liberate us. So it's not like the two-dimensional reflection can jump into our world because it lacks the ability, but there is a kind of liberation, maybe a kind of invitation. It kind of happens to us. You don't do it. You purify yourself and make yourself most ready. This is what okay, here we go. To make yourself most pure, to be that with what is most pure. This is the doctrine that we repeat and believe. All those who are right lovers of learning. Do you believe? Hey, welcome to the chat, Gravedub. This is a belief. Good hope. Think this as much as anyone could. Farewell if anyone could. If anyone could. Good hope. True belief. Based on the logos. All right, and then the mysterious yoga is purification, separate the soul as far as body. Number one. So here's a definition. It's a purification. Demonstration. a little demonstration of that definition. Hey, do you have a logos of purification? Back to what we were talking about. The logos in action. You start with a definition. Here it's, hey, we need a definition. We need a dialectic in our world. We need the dialectic. We need to be taught it in our schools and everywhere. If you have a sufficient logos, then we say, oh yeah, that's sufficient. So person 2 says, oh, that's sufficient. So they have to answer, was what you said sufficient or not? And then we have to judge their answer. Oh yeah, I get it. We need to learn lots of things in school. No, that's not sufficient. You're not quite getting what I mean by dialectic. So I'm going to go from definition, my hypothesis. Remember if we have dialectic, things will be good. We don't know that we don't know it for certain because it's reasoning, because it's understanding. So all of that good hope. If I fare well there, as much as if anyone has. All right, we have to believe this. So it's a hypothesis. Until you confirm it, then it becomes knowledge. But it's the best kind. All right, sufficient or not? Okay. I don't quite know what dialectic is, why what you're saying is the case. Okay, I'll give you a demonstration of my definition of my hypothesis. I've defined my hypothesis, now I'll demonstrate it. Because it's needed to both solve problems and reach our highest meaningful good goals, both individually and collectively as a human race. Are you bringing with yourself enough understanding already? Was that sufficient or not, says person 2. It's not. If not, division. Divide it up. Take either what follows if it is, because we will become together and harmonious, unite ourselves through understanding and knowledge via the dialectic, which is open to everyone, thus benefiting all and the whole. Or, in this particular example, I took what happens if my hypothesis isn't true. Divide that up. Without any understanding, if we don't have the dialectic, we'll have no understanding of how to change our minds, especially our lawmakers, and no ability to explain why contradiction and hypocrisy matters, and is the definition of corruption in reasoning, truth, and understanding. Because right now we're learning, why does contradiction and hypocrisy matter? Because after the division stage, you have to judge. If what followed of the division stage of your definition of what is, if we had dialectic, we have to see there's a necessity and a beauty in the reasoning in your division of your arguments. But if you talked about what it isn't, hey, if we don't have dialectic, this is what follows. That's your division stage. We have to see that there has to be sufficient contradiction or absurdity. If there is a contradiction that follows, if your hypothesis isn't, it must mean that your hypothesis is. It's a way of reasoning. If we don't have this, and that's what we saw in Seebees' argument. Hey, if our soul isn't immortal, then we could not have learned the things we're remembering. So that's absurd. It's a contradiction. That's why contradiction matters. That's why we hate it when politicians or lawmakers contradict themselves. But because we don't know the nature of the dialectic, we can't point it out. Say, hey, that's corruption. That's why a lot of people, right-wingers, get away with saying, oh no, I don't care if I contradict myself. Who cares if I'm absurd? I can be the most contradictory. Just vote for the other team and see how that goes, because people are not voting for me based on an understanding of the dialectic and therefore understanding of reasoning and truth and understanding. I just have the shadow of their ignorance. I look like what they believe is true. But if we have a dialectic, we can define corruption and in reasoning, truth, and understanding. Doesn't matter if you like the doctor or not. If he's a corrupt doctor and he has malpractice, he always gets fired. Doesn't matter what political team he's on. Same thing with everyone. That's why contradiction matters. It's a part of the dialectic. It's how you judge the dialectic. So the definition of corruption, it demonstrates itself as irrational and harmful functioning in our state. So definition, demonstration, division, and causing division and war and unjust laws and destruction of humanity and planet and mass suffering. So this is what follows if my hypothesis isn't. Now, the person who you're talking to, because it's a dialectic, you're two people, listens to that. You can either make an argument if it is, talk about harmonious uniting, no division because understanding and dialectic is open to all. Or you can say what follows if we are not taught dialectic in schools. That we have no understanding of why contradiction matters. And so we can't define corruption. And then that will demonstrate itself as irrational and harmful functioning and laws. And that will cause war and unjust laws and destruction of humanity and planet. And that's the division stage. Division stage within the division's level. Okay, and then the person you're talking to has to judge. Was there sufficient contradiction if what isn't? Or was it sufficiently necessary and beautiful if it was? So again, every time we judge based on whether it was sufficient. And also necessity and beauty, or its opposites, absurdity and contradiction. Okay? And then we take this and then we apply it back to this start. That's the synthesis and analysis. Synthesize and analysis. So we synthesize that to find a key argument from or idea, or a key argument, idea, or conclusion from that division. We apply it back to our definition about whether or not we need dialectic to conclude about whether it is a likely hypothesis. Now we're together. Likely hypothesis. Question in the chat. Will you be covering other philosophies such as Eastern? Yeah, maybe. In order to cover other philosophies, I kind of touch on them as we go. Like, as we go through Plato and the Logos, necessarily, because the Logos is the pattern. There are stages of states of mind. And also stages of understanding. And they connect. Like if you are at this low stage and you're a nihilist, you'd be feeling kind of depressed. If you're just a relativist, you might feel kind of lonely. And then up in the higher stages, if you're a Sufism, you can experience this state of enlightenment. If you're a Taoist, you can experience this state of mind. If you're a Buddhist, you can experience this state of mind or this range. So that's the Logos. So it's as we go, we can point out, oh, by the way, this is called materialism. Oh, this is why this is Taoism. Oh, this, by the way, that's Korean Buddhism. And also corresponding states of enlightenment or states of mind. So we touch on it as we go, and as we hear people like Simmias and Cebes will have a reaction to Socrates giving his doctrine of philosophy, and we can recognize, oh, I recognize him. He's one of those. And then therefore, he's going to move through these states of mind. Sometimes depressed, sometimes lonely, sometimes have an insight, but he can't have that Taoist experience of enlightenment. That's out of his level of development. This is the dialectic and the Logos. But what we can do is we can jump into the texts of the books themselves. But that's only going to be useful if we have the paradigm. Because if we just throw, oh, this is his opinion, that's his opinion, that's their opinion, that's that opinion, what's going to happen is you're going to have a mess of different opinions. You won't have anywhere to put them. We need a coat hanger to hang all these different theories, all these different personal philosophies. Now we're doing the philosophy. Philosophy is only one. If philosophy is wisdom, then there's only one wisdom. If it's truth, if it's self-phronesis, then it's just one. So the best way of going is to just find the truth first. But then once you have the paradigm of the model, you know where to hang all the other beliefs and traditions. So like we went through, like a few days ago, we went through a different translation of the Phaedo. And we recognized the translator was at a certain level, which affected his understanding. There are certain words he was not able to translate accurately. He translated bad as evil. He translated reversion as conversion, which is a very Christian idea. He was not able to distinguish phronesis from wisdom, which are two different states up here. He was blind to this. But thankfully, we're reading the Balboa. We're reading the ideal first, so that we can, when we read a different translator, we can hang him somewhere. We know how to understand him. We can recognize both his logos and anti-logos. We can recognize what's true and false. Is anti or pathologos. P-H-O logos. And his level of development on the logos. And of course, both will be influenced by mythology. So he'll have a personal mythology that informs both. So if we started on the anything but the Balboa translation of the Phaedo, if we started on the Loeb, the Jowett translation, we will have a fundamentally wrong misunderstanding of this doctrine of philosophy from Socrates. And we will miss the special puzzles. What does he say? He calls them riddles. He says there are certain riddles. Let's find riddles. There are certain riddles in the text. Here we go. That if, as we are learning how to read, we're learning the logos, we're learning the dialectic, we realize there is something called abduction. You teach, you give some parts, or you establish a relationship, but you don't give all the answers because it's a living thing. You're talking with a person. So we've been talking about how to use a dialectic with a person in real time. Like this. Ask them a question. Is it sufficient or not? Judge the answer. Why? Because where we're up to, Cebes was able to give a dialectic to show that the soul is immortal, which was pretty cool, but he wasn't able to use it. So part of using it is to not give all the answers. That's a terrible teacher, to destroy a question, because it's a consciousness development, which means you have to have a question that you give birth to, that you can focus on. And if you can sustain that focus, and you can focus on it better if it's your question, it's more your own. You can go from concentration to meditation to contemplation. And in that contemplation, you're actually in that. You unify with the object of your question. That's a mystical experience or knowledge. That's what our word knowledge means, nous. So we have riddles, says Socrates, that have a purpose to purify and perfect you. And because there's a saying, many are the staff bearers, but few are the actual inspired mystic. That's practicing philosophy correctly. So if we didn't have the actual Greek and a better translation from Juan Balboa, we would miss the riddles. Specifically, here we see the virtues, wisdom, courage, sound-mindedness, justice, through a rite of initiation become sound-mindedness, justice, courage, and self-phronesis. Wisdom changes to phronesis in a curious way. So our question we've been carrying all through this text is, what the heck is phronesis? We would not have that if we didn't first read the ideal. Literally, you wouldn't realize, you would miss the rite of initiation. The puzzle that will allow you to have this verification in your own experience as a mystical experience, a change in your consciousness. Equally so, in terms of learning other spiritual traditions, we won't know unless we first learn the nature itself of the logos and the pathologos. We won't be able to recognize how Buddhism varies. What parts of the Buddhism do they get right? And also, what influence of the anti-logos or pathologos limits them? So by learning the truth first, the actual true paradigm, we can take with us a kind of seeing that will allow us to distinguish, oh no, there's a contradiction there. Oh, they kind of started following the dialectic, but then they fell out here. Or they didn't have the logical necessity for that. They're missing the logos here. There's a personal prejudice here, which is fun to do, by the way. So that's why we're first learning the truth, or the logos, and learning it in a certain way where we are preparing ourselves by learning the dialectic and the logos, purifying ourselves in a way that allows us to be closest to the state of being until, where's the quote? Because that is the process, that's the yoga, that's the method. We don't have a quote. Okay, I'm going to have to add it as a quote. For that divine self to liberate us. So we, let's get the quote. I need to make this into a quote. So, the purification that we're going through, D-I-V-I-N, divine self. I need to make this into a quote. So just from the text, so notice I keep going back to the text to get it as accurately as I can, which takes away my personal interpretation or my personal anti-logos, right? Here we go. We must purify ourselves from the body until the divine self should liberate us. Thus, being purified and being liberated from the phronesis of the body, we shall be with a kind like ourselves. And he said that happens through... this is what follows. If we don't have it, we have all these problems. But we get it through... Here we go. We prepare ourselves through the accurate understanding of each of the selves. Justice itself, beauty itself, goodness itself, all of the ones. In a word, Diusia, whatever self you pick. He said here. It's through contemplation, which is our concentration, meditation, joining. The understanding is what purifies us. The self-understanding to make us... so this person who most accurately understands each self they investigate, which we're doing through the dialectic, is the person that will approach most closest the intuitive knowing of the being. Intuitive knowing. It takes us back to these two things. Our knowing, or our state of mind, and our understanding, our ifs. And the best kind of ifs is the dialectic. So once we nail that down, we can go into a Buddhist text or a Taoist text or whatever and recognize, hey, just as we did with Jowett, we could see how his logos was missing the mark, or the influence of his societal anti-logos or personal anti-logos, because we have the paradigm. That's why we do this one first. Otherwise, you're just throwing spaghetti in the wall. And what's going to happen is you're going to find a text, if you haven't mastered the paradigm, that you kind of agree with already. Like, yeah, I really like that. Or I want to believe that. That sounds nice. So we're going to reject all the things that are true that we don't like, or isn't familiar, or isn't comfortable. We're going to reject that, which we're supposed to purify ourselves from. And we're going to gain a stronger loyalty to that which we already have an ignorance attachment to. And then we talked about earlier, ignorance isn't just forgetting. We have to go, where is it? Our question for today was, is it opposites or is it greater, lesser, equal? Opposites are like left and right, and lesser, greater, equal is like the vices are not a lack of virtue, but you have a lot of good things, but you apply it to your problems. So you, like intemperate temperance, you've mastered some of your desires so you can be a better gambler. That's vice. You are good at doing what's most evil, or not evil, unjust. So we have a question for the two big terms, the two big things that makes philosophy, understanding and knowledge. We recognize knowledge because of what we're learning in the Phaedo. Remembering, you know it, it's in you. It's a kind of remembering, which is the argument of why the soul is immortal. It's self-ousia, and like we just read, in one word, it's the self-ousia, whatever being you pick. It's being, it's the truth we seek, it's all of the selves. That's knowledge. But of course, it's not how we use the word, so we take all of these things and we give it the Greek word nous. Understanding, logos, and dialectic. They're the two big ones. But also, as we're seeing, it requires a kind of separation from the body and the physical senses. So that's not how we use the word understanding, so we take all of this and we call it dianoia. Those are the two Greek words, nous and dianoia. So our question is, well, if we're doing this doctrine on the soul being immortal and we have to separate from the body through dianoia to be most close to being until we're sort of the bouncer lets us in, or however it works. Our question is, well, is this forgetting to remembering knowledge, this learning we're here to do, is that an opposite thing? And because that could be an opposite thing, because there's two kinds of relationships that we talk about. There's left and right, which are just opposites. And there's like the world of becoming, which is a reflection of the world of being, which is higher, which is greater, more real. And of course, even the realm of being is somehow emanating from the oneself, which is our ultimate goal. So that's a lesser is to greater is to whole or ultimate relationship. Like your reflection in the mirror isn't the opposite of you. The opposite of you would be an elephant. But it's a fundamental distortion into a lesser realm. It's a greater to lesser. And what's interesting is these two big key things that makes philosophy, knowledge and understanding, are the two big things that your mirror reflection lacks. It doesn't have, your reflection in the mirror can't remember things, doesn't participate in ousia, doesn't have knowledge of being, can't participate in the logos, doesn't have will, doesn't do the dialectic. So equally so, we want to ask the question, is it opposites or is it lesser, greater, equal? Forgetting to remembering and ignorance. This is our unknown destructive loyalty, the cause of our problems, to what we believe is true. We have a fierce loyalty to it, to what we think is true. Being, justice, beauty, often a figure, a parental figure most common, who looked the most beautiful when we were like 3 years old and dependent on this person. This is beauty itself. Oh, that's the most justice. And I'm going to fight to the death anyone who says my dad or my mum isn't a saint or my teacher wasn't a blah, 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 blah. My religious figure, you know. So we kill people. In fact, a lot of these, they specifically function to kill people when people are asking questions, wanting to engage in a cooperative dialectic, want to experience directly the nature of the divine. How dare you? That's hubris or heathenism. So our question is forgetting to remembering opposites or greater, equal, lesser and greater? And is ignorance not the opposite of knowledge, but it's distorted reflection, because there is a loyalty, there is an image of truth and being, giving it its power, that happens to cause the worst injustices or vice. And that was the section where Socrates said, hey, by the way, There are some people who have intemperate temperance. They have a kind of temperance because they can master some of their desires, but because they want to do this other pleasure. So we don't want that. So our question is, why is he bringing up this reflection? He actually literally calls it a outline of a shadow. So back to our question here. The reason why we're talking about that is without the paradigm, objective logos paradigm of the logos, we can't recognize the anti-logos. And if we read a text, we're going to happen to become more fiercely loyal. The cause of vice, the cause of the greatest human problems in society and in ourselves and in our relationships and in what we love, we'll become more fiercely loyal to that because we're reading this book and, oh yeah, I like that. Well, that feels right. That feels true to me. All of these things that speak to your personal opinions, prejudices, or ultimately your pathologos. The false image, the vice version of knowledge. That's what we'll think is true. Because whether we like it or not, everything we read, we have to put it somewhere. You can't just throw spaghetti at the wall. Something has to stick in some way. So we either learn the logos, learn the actual coat rack, or we are going to make bigger and stronger and huger the coat rack of our injustice. The coat rack of our vice. This crap that I learned from my stupid idiot dad. Okay, I shouldn't say that because, well, whatever. I can say it because it's my dad, right? The problems that we learned from our parental figure that appeared just when they were most presenting themselves, that we become fiercely loyalty to, and we fight holy wars for. We vote for the most disgusting politicians because they resemble that. They have the outline and the shadow. Either we learn the logos version of the coat hanger, or we get better at this one. So everything we think we're doing to benefit ourselves will actually be harming ourselves. Because hey, if you're reading some Taoist text, you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to remember that quote. That proves this thing that I have. Because you will have no metric upon which to judge without an understanding of the logos and the dialectic. That's literally why we're going through all this effort to master the dialectic. Socrates says, hey, it's the spiritual method. It's the mystic rite. It's what philosophy is. It's how you live your life well. It's how you connect with providence so that you can live well and be connected to providence in this life and in the next. If you don't do it, you're not doing your job. And you're going to die without knowing where you're going. And you're not going to fare well there. If you do it, you'll have all the benefits here and there. Why? Because of this. Because without mastering the logos and the structure of the dialectic, you will have everything you learn in your life will be supporting the other coat hanger. Because whether you like it or not, you're in a dialectic. You're either in a dialectic with the self through the logos, or you're in a dialectic with your false self, or the pathologos. Patho or anti-logos. Whether you like it or not, you're always talking with yourself. You always have dreams. You always have fantasies or thoughts that come up, bubbling up. And everything you do, you'll be thinking you are doing good, except who taught you what's good? This guy, the usurper to the throne. We just saw that the logos and dialectic leads to the state of mind that we call the ultimate, called the good. And it's also the, not a personal, it's the good, the beauty, the just, and so on. So we either learn the coat hanger of the truth of this, so we have somewhere to hang everything we learn, and purify the coats from this rack, diminish this, a purification, it's perfection of this, and purification of this, 1 and 2, you need both. Or if we don't, then everything we do in our life is going to be supporting this, whether we like it or not, which is a tragedy. Because the more effort you have to more seek your good goals, to more do what's good in the world, you're a tyrant, you're Hitler. Energy, effort, risk doing what he thinks is good, the more power, the more he learns, the better he's going to get at this coat hanger. That's the tragedy of humanity. Doing the most effort towards what you think is good is actually doing the worst vice. If you lack the logos and the dialectic. If you have the logos and dialectic, you can purify your vices and perfect your development together. You have to do both. That's the tragedy. Now, of course, if we can see it, it doesn't have to be tragic. It can be a comedy. If you can see the tragic implications of one fiercely loyal to, I don't know, Trump or whatever. Someone who, because they lack an understanding or a culture of the paradigm, the more harm they're going to do. It's tragic. But if we can see it and we can see a way out, the tragedy can become comedy. And if we can relate better to both sorts of things, we have a new triad. Tragedy, comedy, and philosophy. Why? Well, if a comedy is you can bumble your way through it and sort of escape in a funny way, tragedy is playing up the tragic implications of your problems. Philosophy can relate to both. So, in answer to the question, will we be covering other philosophies such as Eastern ones? Yes. But this is the significance of having the paradigm first. Otherwise, yeah, we're just gonna... Which is the problem of debate. The lesser version of the dialectic. Not the opposite of the dialectic. Maybe it is. No. Well, because you still have questions. Oh, you don't really have questions and answers in debate. In a debate, you walk away with the beliefs and opinions you already had, more solidified in those, because you had to debate for them. Whereas dialectic has a objective paradigm. Doesn't matter what you thought. Literally, because if what you thought was wrong, then you have to change your mind. Which is exactly what we do, because changing your mind means developing your understanding. Changing your state of mind that results is spiritual evolution. You want to have enlightened. What does that mean? I want a different state of consciousness through which I relate to self and reality. That's enlightenment. That's why I sit on the mat. That's why I pray. That's why X, Y, and Z. That's why we do philosophy. Philosophy as the paradigm of the spiritual method. Well, I want to go to school. Why? I want to develop my understanding. 1 and 2, states of mind and understanding. Always those two. Those are the big two. Well, I want to go to school to develop my understanding, which means you have to change your mind. If you go to school, say, well, I think cats marry dogs, and anything my biology teacher tells me otherwise, I don't care, because I'm a cat dog person. My family was, and my grandfather was, and his grandfather was. And to make America great again is to believe that cats marry dogs. You'd be like, well, why did you sign up for biology? What do you mean? You literally have to change your mind. That's learning. Same thing. I think I am enlightened. Well, why are you at the ashram? You recognize that there's a higher state of consciousness and you want to change your mind. Nope. I just want to be a tough guy because my dad was a tough guy and that's what it means to be alpha. And you're just a beta. Well, in your ignorance, why pay your money to sign up to this course, sort of thing? So changing our mind. So if we want to change our mind both in understanding and knowledge, the big two, what's our paradigm? Dialectic. How do we make sure that we're changing our mind based on truth, not our own personal opinions, our own the hat rack we take with us in every encounter? And you might know people like that. You might have a friend and a girl like hits on him and he's like, oh, she's making fun of me. Like, dude, she was absolutely not making fun of you. Why do you always make sense of these kind of interactions in that way? It's the coat rack he takes with him. And doesn't matter how many times you reason with this guy, he's not going to change his mind. Because he didn't learn it through understanding. He learned it through an imitation, a shadow when he was young. And also, not only that, even those experiences that should be proving him the opposite, that he's not ugly and hated, he's going to take as justification for his ignorance. So you can say this anti-logos dialectic is still a dialectic. You are still in a dialectic. Why? You will have experiences self to self that will affect you and affect how you relate to, so that's self itself, the false belief. It will affect you, self to others, and that will affect how you relate to other others, your relationships with women, your way that you walk in the world, the things that you pursue. And then that is going to, back to self, confirm self-confirming bias. Confirm this, making the hat rack stronger. The only problem is it's stagnant. It never changes. That's loyalty. The fact it never changes, the fact that your state of mind never grows, you never develop in your understanding and thinking, is the loyalty to the tribe that served an evolutionary purpose thousands of years ago but doesn't anymore, and is the cause of our problems. Why? Because it confirms a change. What's different about the logos that we could be having with the self? Let's look at it. Same structure. Again, it's not opposite, it's a shadow. So if we were having a dialectic with the self, which is through the logos, which is what we're doing, which is why we're reading, which is why we're talking, then we learn it, the texts affect us, we talk about it, and we understand it, and we go through the arguments, we do a dialectic on the dialectic like we did today, and then that will help us understand the thing we're looking at a higher level. So this other back to self at the end of our learning becomes a new dialectic. This new learning not only sheds new light, a new understanding, a change of understanding and change of mind, to see this in a new way you hadn't before, but then it also rolls on to a new dialectic. This becomes the new dialectic you're doing on beauty now. You're doing on the dialectic now. You've learned more about the dialectic from the latest video, which means you go back into your word program and you redo a dialectic on the dialectic again. And that's going to affect you. And then through the process, you're going to see the dialectic in a new way, and that's going to roll on again. So notice, this is a shadow or an imitation or a distortion of Usia. It does turn around, but in a way that will always confirm the ignorance. Right now, I just saw on Weekend Tonight, John Oliver's show, last week tonight. There's an article on the second most popular party in Germany right now is the Nazi Party. What? They literally haven't learned through their mistakes, which is the logos on the dialectic, on the self. What they're doing is everything they experience, even the tragic implications that follow if they don't follow the logos and instead follow tyranny, even that just serves to justify their Nazism for a lot of people in Germany right now, tragically. So it's stagnant. Doesn't matter what happens to them, they're going to be fiercely loyal to the dictator. That's how come these tyrants can be what they are. It's a stagnant logos. It's a stale. It doesn't evolve upwards as the dialectic does in this sense. Doesn't allow you to change your mind. Why? In order to survive the kind of evolution that humans went through, we had to be fiercely loyal to our clan leader of our cave above everything else because of the ridiculous or the extreme conditions we were in. But it's literally the cause of all of our problems. That's why we need the dialectic to apply. We need to apply the dialectic to recognize this. You will only recognize there is a self-confirming, stagnant ousia in our problems if you recognize the structure of the dialectic. In other words, we have everything we need to cause our problems, to cause the pathologos, but without an understanding of the logos and the dialectic, we don't have what we need to solve them. And therefore, we will always have Nazis. We won't develop to higher and higher states of mind. Hey, even better than Buddhism, even better than Taoism. Evolve it. What's that called? Following the rational, understandable, and knowable, intelligible structure of the logos through the dialectic structure of all reality, to have a spiritual tradition that is not limited, will literally go all the way to the end and can tick every box all the way along. That's literally philosophy. The paradigm of the spiritual and the intellectual tradition. The ousia that evolves and spirals upwards. Hey, it's spiraling upwards, but it's a dialectic between two terms, self and other. So it's a kind of double helix. Or the stagnant ousia of our problems. That's why we learn the logos and the dialectic first, to know the paradigm, to recognize what's false and follow what's true. You need to learn the dialectic, and that's what we've been doing today. In fact, we did a dialectic on dialectic. In fact, that whole reflection can fit into our dialectic on dialectic. So if the premise of this dialectic is, we need dialectic in our school and everywhere, that's the definition, the hypothesis, self to self. Okay? Well, we also have to do a dialectic on if it isn't. If we skipped this and went straight on to study Buddhism or whatever, or if we taught schools without first teaching them the paradigm, if we had philosophy classes on Hegel and Kant without first mastering the logos primarily, what would follow if we didn't have it, self to self? What I just talked about was a dialectic. What would follow if we don't have it? That's the negative coat hanger. How does it function? We just end up confirming our own prejudices, becoming more loyal to it, and becoming more vice, more unjust without that, by staying loyal to the paradigm. Others to others. Why does it happen? Oh, because of our historical, our evolutionary development, staying fiercely loyal above everything else to the leader of our tribe in a cave. That was necessary. There was a kind of justice and beauty, if you see the whole picture, for us to survive saber-toothed tigers and whatever, but is playing out other to other in all of those tragic implications we're seeing. Nazism, no learning, holy wars, capitalism not being addressed, corruption not being addressed, not even having a way of pointing out why it's being addressed. Hey, you can't have corruption. Why? Oh, because that's the division stage of dialectic. Literally, if you have corruption, that means you need to change your mind. Oh no, we don't change our mind. We have a coat hanger we're always loyal to. I'm always Republican through and through. Everyone in my town is. So this is the dialectic of what happens if we don't have the logos and dialectic mastered first. Before we go into other texts, before we vote for a politician, before we learn biology, first learn the dialectic. And of course, other back to self, we become stagnant, fiercely loyal, always a Nazi, and so on. That's a dialectic of what isn't the hypothesis of we need dialectic in our school and everywhere. So I just use the dialectic to put into a coat hanger, to put on a coat rack, all of those words I said, that imagination, that pushing the implications. I use the dialectic even to understand this. I use the dialectic to even understand our problems. Self to self, that's the cause of our problem. What's our cause of our problem? We literally don't have logos and knowledge. We don't have the dialectic. Dialectic is the use of the logos, and dialectic is the way to achieve knowledge. And how do we solve our problems? Well, you learn the dialectic. What happens as a result? You go from tragedy to comedy to philosophy, and also you develop through your understanding and you develop through your states of mind. And hey, you'll pass a Buddhist on the way. But because you have the logos with you, you'll recognize him. He won't recognize you because you might be in a state of mind above him or below him, because Buddhists tend to skip to a certain state of mind, and they call that enlightenment. Equally so Taoists. A Taoist and a Buddhist pass each other on a path, and they don't recognize each other. That's the famous saying. Why? Because they lack the logos. They don't have the model through which to recognize, oh, this is that level of the coat hanger, that's that level of the coat hanger, that's, and so on. Equally so, but we did that. We had a little exercise. We read Jowett's translation of the Phaedo. Oh, that's where he's at here. That's where the Barbara is at, and so on. So that's how cool dialectic is.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why it's so awesome. And now, bringing it back to our two ideas of understanding and back at the start of this, I mentioned philosophical midwifery. Literally the use of the dialectic to our problems to remove them. And I mentioned that earlier, but I want to bring it back right now because we've seen more about the significance of those two key terms, understanding and nous, and balloons. Let's bring in the quote. From Pierre Grimes' book on philosophical midwifery, it is entirely possible to verify for ourselves that we are part of a caring and intelligible universe. The verification is a kind of proof, since it's a way of understanding that's based upon a realization that our mind constantly communicates with us and for our benefit. All the way through, there's that pair. Verify, that's the direct experience. Caring and intelligible, that's that state of mind of the universe. Verification, you have to prove it through yourself, both through understanding and direct experience. Let's hear it again. The verification is a kind of proof. Dialectic, prove it. Since it's a way of understanding, there's our understanding. Based on the realization, there's our nous, our knowledge, understanding and nous. That our mind constantly, there's the high, there's the nous again. What does it do? It communicates. Oh, there's our understanding again. All the way through this quote is a dialectic back and forth with the two most fundamental aspects of being human, of development, of philosophy, of the philosophy of all philosophies. There's just one. Just one. And the other philosophies are just variations of, or diminishments of. And in that quote, you see back and forth, understanding and nous. See it one more time. It's entirely possible, understanding. To verify through what? Understanding and knowledge. For yourself that we are part of a caring and intelligible. Intelligible is the experience of knowing. Intelligible means you can verify it through direct experience. The verification is a kind of proof. There's our proof. That is a kind of understanding. Playing back with the realization that our mind, that's knowledge, communicate. That's understanding. That's the logos. How does the mind communicate? Through the dialectic. That's an awesome quote there. So, on that note, thanks for the question. I hope you judged that answer to be sufficient. Okay, so let's use that and go back into the text. And see how this use of the dialectic, of course, I could have taken that question as an opportunity to use the dialectic myself. Say, oh, by the way, this and that. But for right now, I thought it better to just use it as a way of recapping what we've been learning, bringing it all together and making it meaningful to us, which is the transition from just having a dialectic to using it, making it meaningful. So here, where we are at in the text, we have our friend Cebes. So Socrates gives his doctrine on why philosophy is the separation of the soul from the body, and dianoia is to get there, nous is the experience, dialectic seems to be the method. But also it's not really a method because we're just purifying ourselves to wait for the divine self to liberate us. So it's not something we do, which makes sense, of course, if the higher dimensions have more power, intelligence, wisdom, and so on. he gave the argument of, and then the boys said, okay, thanks for that doctrine, Socrates. It appears to be well said, but humans are much inclined to distrust you, what you said regarding the soul, but believe when it's released from the body it will no longer exist, and it will be destroyed and dissolved on that day when the human being dies. When you leave the body, it's departed like breath or smoke and scattered to the wind, undone, being startled with fear and in no way existing anywhere. Right? Perhaps indeed, I would require a few sufficiently persuasive and trustworthy, hey, if it's trusting and if, arguments that the human soul exists after being dead and we possess some power, and there's phronesis you've been talking about. So he gave his definition of his doctrine, and then what's after definition? Demonstration. CB said, hey, give me the demonstration. Give me some sufficient arguments. And then he gave the three arguments that we've got now down here. Here. Number one, if the being is going from opposites, and we come from greater to less, hot and cold, and therefore that's the world of generation. We're always in a state of growing and decaying. That's the state of becoming. Both for the state that we're in and the process, like we are awake, but we're also waking up as well. We can use it as an analogy. Being alive is to being dead, as being awake is to being asleep. There's our lesser to greater relationship. And so, if we can see people dying, nature would be lame if it couldn't deliver the opposite process, a restoring. Therefore, souls of the dead must exist, because we have to be restored from somewhere. Second argument. If it was a straight line, if you start alive and then you end dead, then everyone eventually would end up dead, like Enderman. Enderman is always asleep. We'd all be zombies. Therefore, it's a cyclical process of returning to life, right? Important to see, hey, why do we have our problems? Why do we become fiercely loyal to injustice? Why do we have all these things that what follow if we don't have the logos and dialectic? Seems unjust to forget everything. Well, if there's a cyclical process, then maybe it's part of a greater whole. And maybe only when seeing that whole, you can recognize the justice and beauty, even in the apparent injustices of our everyday world. Argument 3. If your souls are generated from something other from the physical world, if we need fossil fuels, eventually we'll use up all the fossil fuels and everyone would be dead. Therefore, the living have to come to be, our process, from the dead. You can't get souls from the physical world. Why? Because we'll run out of resources. So these are some arguments that show necessarily that the souls of the dead exist. It's a cyclical process of returning to life, and we come to be from the dead. Okay. This was a response to the doctrine that philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying. Okay, he does that. Enderman. And then, so this is his conclusion here. The cyclical process of returning back to life exists, and the living come to be from the dead, and the souls of the dead do exist. So those three arguments which he gave individually, he brought together, unified them together in his conclusion. Seebees jumps in and says, certainly, but also if the doctrine is true, as you are accustomed to saying often, that learning happens to be for us, nothing other than recollection. And according to this, we have necessarily learned at some previous time, which we now recollect. This would be impossible if our soul were not somewhere before she came to exist in this human form, so that this doctrine of the soul because according to this doctrine, the soul is likely, again, hypothesis, it's an if until you confirm it, to be something immortal. It's a nice little dialectic. What's the if? Definition: if your doctrine of learning is true. Demonstration: a brief because we must have learned at some time now what we recollect. Demonstration: division: show the implications that follow if it is or if it isn't. He picks isn't. If it were not somewhere before she came to this human form, it would be impossible. So it shows an impossibility. A contradiction or hypocrisy, as we've been talking about, follows if it wasn't the case. Therefore, conclusion, synthesis, and analysis. The doctrine of the soul is immortal. So take that back to the subject, other back to self. The soul is immortal. So you filter through, and then you bring it back to the start. And now you know something about the soul, and you can take that with you to keep evolving up, spiraling upward in that double helix. Simius interrupted. Can you show me some proofs? Hey, so that DDAS itself was a definition. I don't quite follow. So give a better demonstration. All right, what does he say? Well, here's a demonstration. There is one excellent logos that when humans are questioned, if they are questioned in a good way, they answer out of themselves about everything that they possess. This could not be possible if you didn't happen to innately know knowledge and right logos. There's our A and B again. Not A and B, our 1 and 2 again. What's his demonstration? Oh, well, if people are good at the dialectic, like Socrates is, they tend to answer from themselves if they're questioned in a good way. And answer, question and answer. This is what we've been looking at, the dialectic in action. And that would be impossible if they didn't already know the logos and right opinion. They didn't know knowledge and the right logos. So what's his demonstration? Look at what Socrates can do. So he doesn't seem to be able to do it himself. So what happens next? Socrates jumps in to save the day. So he couldn't go from... So here is our dialectic on the dialectic connection. What do? Give a demonstration. Not sufficient? Simeon says not sufficient. Then you have to give a demonstration. Because this. Okay? He really couldn't give a demonstration. Oh, because Socrates can do the dialectic. Therefore, you have to know logos and knowledge, the two big ones. Sufficient or not? Well, that doesn't really help me, CBs. Okay, give a division. Break it down to the arguments. He got stuck. So, as we were saying in our question, when will we read other texts? When we have a sufficient understanding of, understanding of the dialectic. Why? For this reason. Because we have a recognition of the dialectic, because we've done this work, we can recognize where he's stuck. Just like we want to recognize, hey, where's the Buddhist tradition at, and where are they stuck? When Socrates came into Parmenides, he did the same thing. Where are you at, son, and where are you stuck? Where are you at? Logos, where you stuck? Anti-logos. Where's your limit? Because we have the dialectic because of this work, and good for us. We can recognize where our friend CBs is stuck. He was able to give a definition. He was able to give a definition, and he was actually familiar enough with the dialectic to do a pretty good dialectic on why the soul must be immortal. Rubbing it up against the theory of learning as recollection. Rub two things together in a dialectic. Double helix, right? Two things. Okay, so we can recognize where he is, what he's good at, give him an A for his dialectic. Where is he stuck? Using it. Hey, can you do it? Well, someone can give a dialectic and ask good questions and show you that your logos and your nous is from yourself. Well, that's what I'm asking you to do now. I'm asking to give me an argument, draw from me my logos or some recognition in my own knowledge that what you're saying must be true. Oh, it can definitely be done. Go ahead. So we can recognize where he's stuck. That's the significance. If we didn't know the logos, if we didn't know the dialectic, we couldn't recognize where he's stuck because we wouldn't recognize, here is the racetrack. He got stuck on turn 2. You got to know the map before you can recognize where the guy's stuck. Equally so for Buddhism and Taoism and any ism you want to, or any personal. And by the way, I really want to. I want to get into like other I love hearing other philosophers talk. There are a few ones that I'm fond of on YouTube, especially. I think they've got a lot of integrity and they speak really well and from different backgrounds, which are interesting. So, when I have more of a following maybe, or more people join in the live chat, or more requests from people, we might have like a watch along of other philosophers' YouTubes, or we could read other texts. I mean, I'm more partial to real life people. It's more fun than texts, but we could do both. As a way of demonstrating our dialectic, demonstrating what we're defining here. How far through the dialectic and logos did they get? Both in their understanding, their logos, and their knowledge, experience, and where are they stuck? And then, how would we help our friend? If they're a philosopher, they're in the game.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
Equally so, what does Socrates do? He recognizes where he's stuck and he jumps in. I'll take over from here, says Socrates. Okay, I'll take over. On the other hand, it indeed does not persuade you, Simius. Consider, if it doesn't, whether the following would be agreeable to you. Okay? Are you okay for a dialectic? I'm not forcing it on you. Do you want to play? Having examined in this way then, in what way would you distrust what we're saying, that the learning is recollection? So what did he say? Hey, where you stuck? First he said, hey, do you want to play? It's, no one's forcing you. And I think that's proper part of it. And then what did he just say? Hey, where you stuck? Where you at? Where you stuck? You really only have 2 questions as a human being. Hey, where are you at? Where you stuck? What's your logos at? What's your latest understanding? What's your latest insight? What's your latest logos or nous? And where you stuck? What troubles are you having? Have you recognized in the troubles that you're having in your relationships, in your life, in your study, in your play, a pattern? Have you recognized it? How far along are you in recognizing where you're stuck? Have you nailed it down? Have you nailed down a cause? Have you nailed down an early scene? Have you nailed down a state of mind? How are you going with where you're stuck? And how are you going with where you're at? Where you at, where you're stuck. That's a bumper sticker. How's your logos? How's your anti-logos? Oh, and are you having fun creating stories or mythology to represent either or both? So really 3 questions you can ask. Where you at, where you're stuck, where's your art? Where's your myths? Do you have any songs I can listen to? Do you have any paintings that you've made? Got a game I can play if you're a game developer? So what does Socrates say? Well, I recognize Thebes is stuck. I'm taking over. What does he say? Where you at? Are you happy to play? And where you stuck? Simius replied, and he's got to respond to him. You got to play off your partner. You're playing tennis. You don't smash aces if he's a beginner. This is, you might want to, if you were in the if philosophy and the logos didn't exist, I'm going to smash you with my arguments. Like those memes. I think this terrible thing, prove me wrong, and I'll smash you with my debate bro logic. Right? There's a lot of funny people like that on YouTube. Very popular too, tragically or comedically. All right. Where you at? Where you stuck? Simius says, on the one hand, I do not indeed distrust you. I'm in good faith. That's important. Make sure your person is in good faith. While on the other hand, I'm in need of this. And this is where I'm stuck. This is what I need. To learn of which the logos is about recollection. Okay? Myself. So in the Greek, it's beautiful. Look at the words. Self, learning. We talked about what's our triad? Lover of learning, lover of philosophy, and lover of phronesis. Self, it's the key self-logos term. Learning of the logos about recollection. Look at those words. So beautifully written. Self, learn, logos, recollection. You just said those 4 words, you know what he means. Isn't that cool? I think so. What do you think, Owen?
Wow. 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 Wow.
Yeah. So that's where he's at, where he's stuck. I'm stuck. I haven't learned about this. I haven't yet learned. So Simius haven't spent as much time around Socrates as Cebes has. And from that, which Cebes attempts to describe, I'm already remembering and I'm nearly persuaded. So he's getting there. Nevertheless, I would like to hear the way you were attempting to describe it. So yeah, so from what Cebes is saying, I'm getting there, but I really want to hear what you have to say. Which is interesting because when Socrates started his philosophical journey, Parmenides described the exercise as the dialectic, and he's like, yeah, I'm getting there, but I really want to hear what you have to say, Parmenides. Can you give me an example of the dialectic? Oh, and do it on the self, the highest possible term. So we see a funny reflection or symmetry in the start of Socrates' life and the end. Simius is saying, oh yeah, I'm starting to get it, but can you give me it? I don't want to hear what Cebes, what knucklehead here has to say. I say knucklehead in an affectionate, playful way, because he's not a knucklehead. He knows the dialectic, and he's there with Socrates, so he's one of the good ones. But compared to Socrates, everyone's a kind of a knucklehead. And we have Tweedledee and Tweedledum here with Simius and Cebes. Again, they're not dumb in any, just a playful. Yeah, you get it. Socrates says, in this way, without a doubt, if anyone recollects, someone must have already known at some time beforehand the whole principle of recollection. So, question and answer. Do you agree? Simius, I agree. So now we have a back and forth. So now, Socrates takes over the dialectic in action that we have been ourselves putting our time and our effort and our recollection and using our highest understanding to ourselves, see for ourselves. Question and answer, person 1 and person 2. Socrates recognized, this is where you're at, Cebes, and this is where you're stuck. You can't go into the next stage. I'm going to take over. So, and now we're going to get a masterclass on what it would be to use the dialectic in action. Hey, if Socrates just gave this masterclass of a definition of what philosophy is and how it's mysticism, how it's perfecting our understanding to be receptive to being, justice, beauty, all of the selves, bring them all together, say it's self-ousia, say it's being, bring all those together and say it's truth, add this other idea of phronesis, which ties to the virtues, giving us a riddle to solve, making it not just a definition, but a puzzle, making it a spiritual thing, making it the dialectic in action, giving us something to do. Hey, here's the definition of philosophy. This is why it's important for death and life. It's the study and practice of death and dying. Here's why. And by the way, here's a puzzle. It's a riddle. It's initiation if you can figure it out. It's a masterclass. Masterclass on the definition. Masterclass on defining philosophy. And now his friends are like, yeah, but some people might not think the soul's immortal. I know people like that. Do you? So what would you say to them? He started off with 3 simple arguments. Cebes jumped in CB's got stuck, took over. Okay, now I'm talking with you specifically, Simius. He started like just giving his own arguments. If this is the case, and this is the case. But now he's going to be talking with a person. So now what we're going to get next is a masterclass of the dialectic in action. And we're going to have an opportunity to see what we have been learning. This stuff. Which is what? Moving from our own understanding to our own direct experience. Verifying and validating. The two big ones. Understanding and experience. That's what it means to be human. That's our quest. So exciting. That's what we'll do next time. We'll have a fantastic opportunity to demonstrate our understanding, demonstrate what we're defining, see in action a masterclass of the dialectic in action, which is what we've been learning. So lots of fun, lots of excitement. I hope you join me. I hope you're curious. I hope you're puzzled. I hope you got some questions about what we talked about today. And I hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for joining me in the chat too. Appreciate it. I'll see you next time.